Night. There's a full moon in the sky, stars. A few clouds float up to the moon. Little pink-haired girl asleep in her crib. She tried to warm her hands by blowing on them. The girl pulled up the blanket. A teddy bear lay beside her, and the bed was huge. Darkness began to fall near the window, and the girl did not realize what kind of room it was, for it was very cold, and she thought she was going to freeze to death at this rate. Suddenly, someone called her name. Her name was Anissa. She opened her eyes. Anissa woke up, rubbed her eyes, and thought that someone had come to visit her. The girl smiled as she realized that none other than her baby brother had come to see her. The boy was 8 years old, and his name was Dietrich Lagrange, standing by her bedside and realizing he had woken his little sister. They looked at each other. Anissa admitted that she was awake. This caused the boy to ask questions. The girl was surprised that at that age her brother could control his shadow like his hand. The shadow stroked her head. Anissa realized that even if you are the strongest villain in the world, even you, being with someone, can change. She reached out her pen to touch the shadow. The interesting thing is that the world the girl lived in was the world of a short story she had read in a past life. That novel was called The War of the Roses of Those Men. The boy in front of her is the sole heir of the Lagrange family. He got rid of all the candidates for the throne. Also, the girl knew that before becoming a hero, this boy was sealed by Hermann Euclid. The little girl was brought out of her thoughts by the boy's voice, asking if someone had come to see her again. Anissa looked at him and didn't know who he was talking about, but she admired the fact that he was holding up just fine, even when sealed. The little girl looked like an angel, but in her mind, she was drooling at the thought of how cool the kid would be when he grew up. Dietrich did not answer his sister's question and asked her to ignore his words, but then asked if her abilities had begun to manifest Anissa, and Dietrich were brother and sister on their mother's side. The girl held her toy, lowered her eyes, and was sad that her abilities had not manifested. The problem was also that she had no innate ability to control shadows. The girl cried and apologized to her brother. Dietrich looked intently at his sister. Anissa crawled to the edge of the bed, grabbed the boy by the sleeve of his shirt, and apologized again. For she knew another secret. She and he were not brother and sister. The baby was born into the Euclid clan, and the man who will seal Dietrich is from her family. It will be Hermann Euclid who is the protagonist, but in fact Hermann knows nothing of her existence. Plus Anissa was born without the power of the sun. Her mother couldn't believe she was her daughter. The woman looked at the baby in the cradle and couldn't believe her eyes. At that moment, the woman decided to kill her daughter. So the mother gave up the girl, the Lagrange clan kidnapped her, and the Euclid clan didn't go looking for her. So Anissa became Dietrich's sister, and until she leaves this house, she will trust him. The girl looked up at the boy from below, held him on her sleeve, and talked about how she would only trust him. The little girl rejoiced in the fact that she was born an aristocrat. She clutched her one and only toy, for she too is despised in this life. Anissa realized that although she had become part of the Dietrich family, they weren't going to spend money on her since she didn't have any outstanding abilities. So she decided to get along with her named brother. But then a toy appeared in front of her face, and Dietrich asked her sister to accept it. It was a rattle that the boy threw next to the girl on the bed. Anissa took offense. She didn't want to accept the gift, as she didn't think she looked like a child playing with rattles. But she took the rattle in her hand nonetheless. The rattle's eyes lit up with red flames. A knife also appeared from the toy. Baby was insanely surprised by the gift. A brother looked at his sister and said that this rattle turns into a knife when shaken violently. A guy told a girl that if a stranger's shadow got in and wanted to kill her, she should shake this thing. He shook his hand in front of his throat and said the little girl would have to do the same thing with that thing in front of the villain's throat. Anissa's face changed as she couldn't believe that she looked like a child who could kill a man. The girl threw the rattle away from her and said she couldn't do it. At this point, the little girl was frightened by the look on her brother's face. Anissa screamed that she was a baby, so she couldn't do it. She cried and kept saying she couldn't. Little girl didn't understand how her brother could ask her to kill someone. She thought he was crazy. Anissa hoped that a sweet life awaited her, since she was born into a noble family. The girl buried her face in the bed, crying, and the brother looked at all this and was silent. It was clear that it was over. In her previous life, she was an outcast in her family. She was less talented, so she was seen as a disgrace to the family. She thought that life as the Duke's daughter would be much better, and so she thought, until she entered the world of books and became Anissa Euclid. But even as she became a little girl again, she realized that she had received a decent upbringing in her previous life. Even as an infant, she was treated strangely by her new family. At the Lagrange house, even the young servants such as Lancel treated her with contempt. The boy thought he was unlucky because the child sighed. Even though the girl couldn't speak, she understood everything. He complained that he had to take care of her, and the little girl realized that the reason for all this was that he was new and had no proper connections. The boy clutched his hand into the crib. He thought his Mrs. Camille was a poor woman. He wondered why the woman had died giving birth to such a talentless daughter. The girl lay in the crib. He held up a diaper that needed changing and whimpered about it. The girl lay staring at him, her ears starting to hurt from his screams. But Lancel wouldn't stop. Camilla was one of the Duke's wives and the mother of the novel's main villain, Dietrich. In the book, it was said that the woman died giving birth to a daughter, but that was not the case. Anissa was brought to a woman when she was pregnant. The girl was cute, but also the daughter of their enemy. The beauty of the Duke's wife mesmerized the girl. The woman took Anissa away from her home, but was captured by Euclid's soldiers and killed. Then the knights had orders to kill everyone. During the kidnapping and battle, the Knights of Euclid did not bother to save the girl, but instead wanted to kill her. She was next to a pregnant woman who fought with them, but was exhausted. The knight's goal was to kill the girl. A splash of blood fell on her cheek. Blood dripped from the warrior's sword, and the woman bowed her head. Camille was dead, and the baby lay beside her. The knight stood looking at this picture. Then the man swung and raised his sword. Anissa's memories were cut short at this point. Camille and her child were killed, and she was accepted by House Lagrange as a native daughter. Living in the Duke's house was better than dying, but she continued to be treated as an outcast, even by this newfangled servant. The girl was almost crying, and the guy was calling her ugly and pulling her hand. She was in pain and crying, and the guy didn't understand why she was doing it. Lanson screamed, for he thought he was the one who should be crying, not her. And then Anissa startled. The child noticed that an aura of black hatred appeared at the boy's heart, for he wanted death to her. But the middle in that clot of hate was blue. The boy leaned over the crib and wept bitterly. The blue colour of the aura spoke of sadness, and the girl concluded that the guy loved his mistress. Anissa did not have the power of the sun, but she had the power of a deity to see people's aura and foresee the future. Lancel stood up and wiped away his tears. The girl hoped he had calmed down. Then he turned around and walked away from the room. The boy left. The girl started screaming and crying because she wanted to eat, and the servant took off Anissa, got the impression that this way he wanted her to die, and started sucking her finger. The girl kept crying. She knew there were more than 20 children in this family, so it was understandable that some of them would be unsupervised. 2 people were walking down the hallway, and the girl thought Duke Derek was a bad man who only recognized his children who were successful and who had been tested. Someone took hold of the doorknob, and the girl realized that these checks were not easy. Anissa noticed that the door to the room had opened, and she realized that she was in danger because the other heir children had special, outstanding skills and abilities. 2 children came into the room. They were looking at her and talking amongst themselves. At that point, they decided they needed to end it, and the girl was scared. The boys approached the crib. They smiled, but they also wanted to kill it quickly. She saw a bright yellow aura on the boys, and it scared her. It was no secret to her that eliminating the competition was one of the trials in the Lagrange family. The boys pondered how they would do it. The girl clutched the blanket in her hands. The only thing she could do was cry, and it annoyed her, but she didn't want to die, and the teens cowered. The younger brother was shaking, and the girl thought he had a conscience. But it was not her sweet sobbing that stopped them, but the appearance of Dietrich, who was interested in what was going on in the room. The boy stood in the doorway and continued to insist, his brothers looking at him. Dietrich looked distant, but asked what his brothers were doing. Dietrich was the lesser for his brothers, so they said it was none of his business. Anissa wanted to see the face of her named brother, who would become in time the strongest villain of this world. But the girl was still a baby, so she couldn't sit up and raise her head. Dietrich, however, did not back down and repeated his question. It made his brothers wince. Suddenly the two men were somewhere. Dietrich lifted the brothers into the air with his hands, which appeared from the shadows. They were asking to be released. Then the boy came to the crib. He looked at his sister, and she realized he was a very handsome boy. Anissa stopped crying and looked at the boy, for he was shining in her eyes. The older brother told the younger that disposing of newborns was the business and tradition of the heirs of the family, but Dietrich looked at the girl and objected to the older one, for he realized that there was no one to protect her absolutely. Dietrich glared at his brother and said that they were going to kill that child in front of him. At this point, using the shadow to squeeze his brothers' bodies, they began to shout that they knew that the girl was his sister. After these words, Dietrich loosened his grip, as he did not quite understand the information about his sister. The boy removed the shadows, and his brothers fell to the floor, then asked about the fact that did they really think he had stopped them just because that girl was his sister. The brothers sat on the floor and asked why he was doing this. Dietrich reminded of the defense clause in this game. The older brothers were frightened and had black blobs of energy directed at them, so they began to ask for his forgiveness. Dietrich looked at them and asked them to get out of his sight. Dietrich stood by his sister's bed and watched his half-brothers run out of the room. And the girl looked at him with admiration, for even at the age of 6, he was a very charismatic boy. The girl realized she had to be near him to survive. The boy waved his hand without turning around, and Anissa realized she had to hold on to him until he ran away. And then the boy raised his hand and clenched his fist. Dietrich stood still, staring at one point, a spot appearing there. At some point, the room became very dark, and the girl realized that the brothers had not escaped. The boy glared at her and decided to approach her. The girl recalled that in the original version of the novel it was Hermann, not Dietrich, who had used her. But now something had gone wrong, and it became clear that only the future main villain was the only one she could trust. The girl smiled and held out her arms to the boy. She wanted him to be her protector in this house, since he would only find out who she was during the war. So now, Anissa was trying to show him all her charm. But it wasn't working on her brother. Dietrich kept looking at her, and the girl noticed that his aura had no colour, and the boy remarked that his sister was very noisy. And the girl grabbed her little brother's hand, but he pulled his hand away sharply and asked what she was doing. This trick didn't work either, but she was an unusual child, so she didn't cry when her brother wouldn't let her take her hand and continued smiling. The girl continued to pull her arms towards him as she wanted him to feel the power of her touch. Anissa was happy because she was able to reach her brother's finger without pulling his hand out, and asked what the word Pia meant, and the girl smiled and repeated the word and pointed her finger at him. The boy realized that's what she was calling him. It meant brother in baby language. The whole thing made Dietrich's face twist. At that moment, the doors to the room opened and a man with an intimidating aura walked in. That bloody aura made Anissa shrink in her crib, and her brother stared emotionlessly at the man who entered, while the girl trembled. Derek, the head of House Lagrange, came into the room and asked what the boy was doing in the room. The boy replied that he was fulfilling the conditions, and the girl noted that the Duke's aura looked like dirt, as it collected all possible negative emotions. They talked about the girl as if she wasn't in the room. Without paying attention to the girl, Dietrich said she was Camille Lagrange's daughter. The Duke then turned his attention to Anissa. The Duke did not immediately remember his wife. It turned out she was a battle slave he had once bought, the boy agreed, now not looking his father in the eye. The man didn't understand why she wasn't in the room next to the baby. Dietrich said she died in childbirth, but this information caused negative emotions in the man, as he thought it was a waste of money. After that, he began to approach the son and the girl, saying that at least he had a candidate for heir. Girl stares at man thinking he's crazy. Derek looked at his son and talked about how previously all the children of the family had died in infancy. But there were those who became heir candidates at an early age. But that didn't mean you could relax on that. So the boy needed to show what he could do, or he'd better die. Dietrich swept a glance at her brother, or rather at his straight back. Anissa was starting to get angry. She didn't understand the Duke's behaviour. The girl only looked at her brother, or rather at his straight back. Duke Lagrange turned around and decided to leave the room. But lastly, he ordered his son to behave himself, and Anissa remembered one of the indecent gestures from her past life and showed the man the middle finger. At this point, Dietrich looked at his sister. and the girl angrily didn't understand what had happened to this father. Noticing this, she began to smile at him again, and he used his skills on the girl. Something buzzed as the boy touched her forehead, so he wanted to see if she had powers, but he didn't find anything interesting. But what was interesting was that she thought that her powers were not so weak, that they could be so easily detected. This gave him the opportunity to conclude that the girl was about to die. After the little girl heard this, she grabbed her brother's finger again. She smiled, believing she wouldn't die. Anissa was going to hide in his shadow and survive, and the boy was looking at her. Now she was alone in the room and realized she needed to look good to carry out what she had planned. The girl was angry that her brother had not visited her again since then. Suddenly she thought she heard Dietrich's voice, so the girl transformed into a cute little girl, but she was mistaken. It was a servant who brought her a bottle of food. They didn't like each other. The man was disgusted every time he entered the room, so he delicately put a bottle nipple in the girl's mouth. The baby was reluctant to drink the formula because it was too cold. As Anissa ate, she thought that Lancel didn't do it on purpose. He's just not a very smart guy. But then she realized that he had done it on purpose, while he was saying that life was cruel and she was stubbornly clinging to it. After the girl had eaten, the man began to try to put her in the crib, and she thought about the fact that when she had the power, she would finish him off. The improperly prepared food caused the girl to burp. Anissa smiled at him and tried to say something, but most importantly, she was going to make him regret his actions in the future. At this very moment, Lancel decided she was bored, so he took her armpits to lift her. Lancel took the baby out of the crib, put her on the floor to crawl, and decided to leave, as he had a lot of other things to do today, while he looked at her and told her to play quietly and not to cause trouble. The servant left and the girl remained sitting on the floor, smiling and waving at him, and then she got on all fours and decided to crawl through the open door as her body was ready for it. Anissa crawled to the door and shoved her toy through the crack. Anissa looked pleased as she managed to lock the doors, and then she started to crawl. So Anissa crawled through the castle corridor. She wanted to find Dietrich by the scent of his aura. The whole process made the little girl feel like a dog, but that didn't stop her, and she continued her search. The girl realized that the boy must be sought in the forest of wilting roses, the place where he had been locked away since he was a child. The place was beautiful. There was a shaped arch and lots of roses of different colours. But the place seemed creepy and fit for a villain. She crawled across the grass, and then, behind one of the rose bushes, she saw Dietrich. Anissa happily crawled up behind the boy as he stood holding the shovel. What she saw surprised her. The picture the girl saw was highly unusual. Dietrich had buried Lancel up to his neck in the ground, the servant screaming and begging to dig him up and let him go. But it wasn't Lancel. It was Yurick, another one of Dietrich's brothers. He asked to be let go, but the younger one said it was his brother's own fault, as he was the first to break the rules of the game at this very moment. Anissa started pulling her little brother by the edge of his shirt. He didn't realize what was going on, so he started to turn around to clear his head. And then he saw his sister sitting on the ground, asking inaudibly what he was doing. So he held out his hands to the girl. Dietrich lifted his little sister in his arms to his eye level and asked her to speak in human language. He did not yet realize that Anissa could not pronounce words correctly because of her age, so she only smiled sweetly. The girl tried her best to be nice. It worked, and though he said nothing, he took his sister gently in his arms and sat her down. Anissa thought that since her brother was holding her in his arms, this was a great chance for her. But the buried guy didn't share her joy, and looked at them angrily, and he started yelling that he was still here, and all they were doing was looking at him. At this point the girl hesitated, for she realized that Yurick Lagrange was in front of them. Who was Dietrich's right-hand man, but that made the girl question what he was doing in the ground. In the book, this guy will be loyal to his lord against Hermann. But now Dietrich had him buried up to his neck. Anissa didn't understand, and was pointing her finger at him, which made him angrier and angrier. But Dietrich paid no attention to Yurick. He noted that his sister spoke like a hen. She was pleased, for she thought it was cute. But it wasn't. Dietrich said it was time for her to get down. It was beginning to hurt the girl, because he actually threw her on the ground and told her to crawl on her own. After that, the boy turned around and started walking away, leaving Yurick and Anissa behind. Yurick was screaming and begging to be dug up, and the girl was reaching out to him. The girl wouldn't give up. She wanted another chance. Yurick was calling out for Dietrich too. So the girl tried her best to catch up with her brother, but he was going too fast for a child who was crawling after him, because she couldn't lose him. Because she had no idea when she'd have another chance to meet him. And then she had an accident. She hurt her hand when a piece of glass got stuck in it. It hurt, and the girl's eyes filled with tears, and the girl cried. It made Dietrich stop. The wound was bleeding and hurting, so the girl started to cry, and she was getting louder by the minute, but the guy wouldn't come near her, and she realized he probably wouldn't. But suddenly Anissa noticed how the color of his aura had changed. His aura turned red, which could mean that he was angry with his sister, so the girl decided to stop crying and try to hold back her tears. Her brother kept looking at her, and the girl thought he would kill her if she couldn't hold back her crying. And the girl tried. She was shaking, blood dripping on the grass, and the boy asked why she had stopped crying. The guy started reaching out to her, saying she'd probably die anyway. So he suggested she die soon. At the thought of dying, the girl closed her eyes. But something happened that she didn't expect. The boy knelt down on one knee in front of her and began to examine the wound on her little hand. There was a splinter stuck in her pen. The blood wouldn't stop. The guy moved it. This caused a new onset of pain, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Then, holding her pen, took out the splinter, and then he threw him on the grass in a pool of blood. He then gently touched her cheeks, a gesture that surprised the girl, for the boy was gentle and wiped away her tears. Dietrich looked at her intently, saying that she was a very strange child. Then he took her little hand again and began to examine the wound. While she watched him, the boy had already shifted his focus, and Anissa realized that he was strange too. Dietrich found a piece of cloth to bandage his sister's open wound, and the girl couldn't understand how this boy could be a villain in the future, since he didn't look like one. The boy tightened the bandage, causing another bout of pain, so the little girl wanted to cry again, but afraid because he might get angry about it, she sniffled. Anissa reached out her arms to him, for she realized that she could not get home, that is, into the room, without help. So the little brother took her in his arms, which surprised the little girl. She was afraid Dietrich would leave her here alone, but he didn't. This act showed that the boy was kinder than he looked. Dietrich carried her sister in her arms through the forest, while she thought of how this child would soon become someone who would feel no remorse for killing many people. The boy brought the girl to the palace, and then she only noticed that the house was huge, but too empty, and it must have become so. After the death of the mistress, Lady Camilla, Dietrich was already opening the door to her room. A maid was working in the room, changing sheets. A boy came inside and said the girl had hurt herself. Dietrich repeated, but the woman looked angry. The maid said indifferently that it didn't matter, but the girl clung to her brother because she didn't understand why the servants were treating them that way. He didn't like this behavior and wasn't sure what to do with the girl, and the little girl knew that if he killed the servant girl, he would be excluded from the candidates for heir. But this time Dietrich surprised everyone by asking the maid to cure his sister. The woman was sure that the boy had hurt the girl, so she didn't understand why he was asking her to heal her. The little girl resented the way the maid spoke to her brother, and the boy had already said that he had not hurt his sister. The maid accused the boy of lying because she thought that if he was born a slave, he was worthless, and it was time for him to show his vulgar nature. And the boy stared at her, but he took control of himself and did not react, and said that the wound had glass in it, and needed to be treated because it could fester. The woman stood and looked at him, but he pulled himself together and said that there was glass in the wound and it needed to be treated because it could fester. The woman stood there looking at him. This woman allowed herself too much, as if she was the mistress here. She claimed that Anissa was going to die anyway, and the palace had no money for medicine for them. She smiled and looked satisfied. The servant didn't realize she was digging herself a hole. Dietrich's aura turned red. He was furious. But for now he decided to start with words and said that he was well aware that she and Lancel were stealing the gold that was his by birthright. The woman smirked and decided to walk past the boy out of the room. She walked past him with a haughty look and told him he had no right to accuse anyone without proof, and asked him to hide his vulgar character from everyone. Dietrich stopped holding back and locked the doors with one hand. His eyes flashed red, and he glared at the woman, now beginning to feel threatened, though she continued to look down at the child. Next, the boy put his foot between the door and the jamb and muttered that if the woman could not help his sister, then she must give him the medicine he needs. The maid standing in the doorway was frightened and tried to prove that she really had no medicine, but the boy stood opposite her and stared at her. The little girl was crawling around in the room trying to figure out what was going on. But the woman tried to prove that she had no money for medicine and escape, but she couldn't because Dietrich was holding the door. At this point, Anissa crawled over to her brother and grabbed his leg and pulled it towards her with all her strength. She succeeded. The door slammed shut and the boy glanced at her over his shoulder. Dietrich looked at his sister, who was smiling at him, and could not understand why she did it, and the answer was on the surface. The girl knew that just a little more and the boy would be in great pain. The boy crossed his arms over his chest, leaned against the door. He knew the girl was too young to understand what he was talking about. Dietrich looked very lonely, and the little girl sensed it, so she decided to smile at him. As expected, he did not appreciate such a gesture and called his little sister a fool. This made the girl a little angry, for she did not think she was foolish. She sat on the floor and smiled, and suddenly, Dietrich let out a chuckle that sounded like laughter. This pleased the child. He bent down and took the girl in his arms and carried her off in an unclear direction. Asking her to behave, Anissa didn't understand where they were going either and looked around, puzzled. So they came to some room, and Dietrich put his sister on the bed. Since both the bed and other things were larger, Anissa concluded that it was his room. The boy, however, was doing something near the table. It was very dusty, even worse than the girl's room, and the guy was already pulling out different vials with beautiful liquids, probably medicinal tinctures. Selecting a vial of blue liquid and picking up a clean cloth, he knelt down in front of the girl. The boy was worried as he had never treated anyone before. Slowly, Dietrich began to unwind the bandage on his sister's arm. He asked her not to cry even if it hurt, as he didn't like people crying. The wound didn't look good. There was a lot of blood that apparently wouldn't stop oozing from the wound. Anissa realized that her brother was asking too much of her. She was too young to hold back her emotions, but she was determined to hold on. Still, she was in pain and flinched every time the boy touched her. Worse, when he poured blue liquid on the wound, tears came to the girl's eyes. But the boy, even though he could feel her shivering, didn't stop and continued to pour the liquid on the wound, and then Anissa cried. The girl was afraid that Dietrich's aura would turn red, but nothing happened, and he looked at his sister with his coal black eyes and remained silent. But his silent help made her cry harder and harder. Strangely, at this moment, Anissa could sense the melancholy in her brother's gaze and movements. Meanwhile, in the garden, birds were singing, butterflies were flying, roses were blooming. The weather was fine and sunny. At this time, the girl opened her big eyes and looked around. Anissa realized she was in a room. Her room. She didn't remember how she got here. She must have passed out yesterday. Plus, there was a white bandage on her arm, which meant the boy had finished treating her yesterday. Whatever Dietrich had watered her hand with, today it hurt less, and the girl lay quietly in her crib trying to move her fingers, to squeeze and unclench it. Besides, she realized that the situation was more complicated than she had thought, namely, Dietrich was a candidate for heir, but everyone avoided and ignored him. He had no support, not even Yurick. In this, the boy was like her. In one word, they only had each other, but they had no financial support. This led to Lancel and the maid being paid less than the other servants. Plus they had to manage the castle and look after her and her brother, so their discontent was building up. This attitude offended Anissa because she thought that children should not be treated like this. At that moment, Lancel entered the room, so the girl decided to charm him with her smile. The young man brought a bottle of formula as it was breakfast time, and the little girl tried to approach him. Surprisingly, Lancel noticed that the girl's arm was bandaged, so he asked her what was wrong, even though he realized he wouldn't get an answer, and then remarked that as long as she was alive it was okay. This kind of cold attitude hurt the little girl's ego a little. She wanted to be taken care of a little better, so she reached out her little hands to him. Lancel realized what she wanted, but this caused a new wave of resentment in Lancel. He didn't understand why he had to take care of the girl, and an aura of danger began to emanate from him, which made the little girl shudder because he was talking about Camille Leda and her death again, blaming it on the child he blamed the girl. His aura grew darker and darker. Anissa reached out to him in desperation and asked him to turn her white. Little girl remembered that this was how the protagonist had cleansed people's auras in the original book. Thank God she did it too. The servant's aura brightened. The change in the young man's aura colour had changed his thought process as well. He now believed that the child could not be to blame for his mistress's death. Anissa smiled with pleasure at herself. The girl had to do the same procedure every time Lancel came in. He had already put a bottle of cold formula in her mouth, which she didn't like very much. The young man stood by the crib, sighing. He hoped that when Dietrich became a candidate for heir, then the situation in the castle would be better, and they could get more money. But it didn't happen. The guy thought that the reason for that was because he was the unofficial heir. Lancel was thinking that maybe he should change jobs. This encouraged the little girl, as she hoped that he would be replaced by someone better. But the servant's next words made Anissa angry. It turned out that Dietrich hadn't been fed for a long time, but he wasn't dying. The baby coughed, sat up in her crib, and the servant even showed concern for her by asking her to drink slowly. Meanwhile, Lancel also told me that there was no trace of breadcrumbs in the kitchen, which meant that Janine was not feeding Dietrich at all. Anissa did not calm down, even though the servant fed her, because she thought that her brother should be fed too. At this point, the girl shuddered, as what was happening in that house was truly insane, as starving a 6-year-old child was unacceptable. The little girl even snatched her bottle from the servant out of anxiety, and the young man, seeing this, decided to leave and come back in the evening, and ran out of the room, leaving the baby alone. Looking at the closed door, the girl realized that Herman, the main character, would have grown up to be a villain too, if he had grown up in a house like this one. So taking a bottle in one hand, Anissa climbed out of her crib, fell to the floor, and assumed a crawling position. And from that day on, it was her duty to feed her big brother. So Anissa confidently decided to feed her brother, so she kept her way to the door. But before doing so, she decided to look in the mirror that was on the dresser. So the girl stuffed the bottle into the pocket of her outfit and tried to reach for the object she needed. It was difficult for her, but in this body she could already stand and walk a little, so she tried her best to reach the mirror. After so many failed attempts, the girl was still able to touch the edge of the object. So the mirror fell to the floor and something rattled in it. Now Anissa had a chance to look at herself. The reflection surprised her a little, because she didn't expect to be such a beautiful girl. But her mood was spoiled by the memory of Lancel, for he was always saying she was ugly. But he wasn't the first. Her own mother thought she was cursed because she had red eyes, which was frowned upon in the south, and people with such eyes were banished from every family and settlement. Yet the little girl thought it didn't matter. The girl couldn't look at herself as she looked at the cute, petite and beautiful little girl, and then she remembered that she had forgotten to feed her baby brother, who was still a little prettier than she was. Before heading out, the baby decided to drink some formula. She now looked satisfied and full of energy. At this time, Dietrich was walking in the garden near the fountain, and the girl had already started on her way. After a while, Anissa got to the boy. She wanted to climb up to her brother, but there was too much dust on the edge of the fountain, so she coughed. Dietrich, however, waited no longer and picked up his little sister in his arms and set her down beside him. The boy thoughtfully asked why the little girl was here. He kept at it, and was now picking on her smile as the girl smiled happily at him. And then the girl handed him her bottle like a super prize. Meanwhile, Anissa kept poking him with the bottle, but Dietrich didn't really like it and recoiled from it. So the first word of the baby went in, calling his brother Mummy. She continued to babble in her childish language, which Dietrich did not understand, and asked her sister to speak normally, not to poke him with a bottle. But she couldn't speak yet, though she wanted to, so now she grabbed her brother by the sleeve of his shirt. The boy looked at her attentively, and Anissa was now showing by example what she wanted him to do, and she wanted him to take the bottle and drink from it. Then she handed her bottle to the boy again, and it was his turn to eat. Now he understood what the little one wanted from him, but he refused the pleasure. Nevertheless, the girl did not give up. She thought her food was not so bad, sweeter than it looked. Further, Anissa was going to force open his mouth and make her brother drink. She was picturing a bottle airplane flying straight into the boy's mouth. At this point, Dietrich knocked the bottle out of the girl's hands, which fell on the grass, for he did not want to eat that way. The boy and girl looked at each other. Dietrich was already on his feet and repeated that it was not for him. Anissa turned away and was about to crawl after her cuteness. She thought her brother was a very stubborn child who wouldn't even pretend to drink. The girl was already on the ground and grabbed the bottle with her hand. Her brother's behaviour hurt her and tears came to her eyes. She wanted to cry, but she decided not to. She didn't realise that giving him a bottle didn't mean he would drink and become like her. Anissa sat with her back turned away from her brother, ignoring the fact that he was calling out to her. At this point, Dietrich went over to her and grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and lifted her up to his eye level because he thought she was crying. He wanted to understand the reason why she was crying, so he sat her on the edge of the fountain and suggested that the reason she was in a bad mood was that he had not drank the mixture. It wasn't really about that. It was just that suddenly the girl felt miserable, so to get her sister to stop crying, he snatched the bottle out of her hands and drank the mixture in one gulp. Afterward, he looked at his sister and considered that she must have been happy. The little girl looked at her brother with all eyes, and he said he'd had worse things to drink than this mixture. Anissa was happy. Anissa's mobility was improving, and she was getting out of her crib a lot. She sat down on the floor and began to wrap her bottle in a cloth, for it had been a month since she had nursed her brother. She was going to go to him again, for the girl always went to him first. The girl was on her way out when she thought she should bring the cookies Lancel had left for her. So the little girl went to the dresser to get a box, and it happened that the box fell, and the cookies scattered on the floor, but the girl picked them up quickly. Now she was ready to depart, and opened the doors of her room, crawled out into the castle corridor. And then in the corridor, Anissa saw a boy in front of her. This boy turned out to be Yurick. The question was different. What was he doing in Castle Dahlia? The boy picked up the little girl in his arms. He realised she was Dietrich's little sister, but she started to kick. Yurick argued that it was dangerous for such small children to walk alone, and he didn't understand where the girl could be going with that cute little package. There was another problem. Yurick's aura had turned red, not bright, but nevertheless Anissa could feel the hostility coming from him, so she knew she had to be careful. So Yurick decided to take the little girl hostage and threaten Dietrich. He took her under his arm and walked forward, but he didn't realise that he couldn't influence his brother in this way. But on the plus side, she could relax, because it was much more comfortable. The girl's behaviour puzzled Yurick. He realised that she wasn't afraid of him, and Anissa just smiled, because she had already been tried to kill several people, so she was not afraid of Yurick either. The boy was a little embarrassed, because he was a very strange and cute child. Anissa decided that she was cute to herself, but then it occurred to her that others might think she was average. At that moment, the girl handed Yurick a cookie. This gesture was very cute, and the boy was a little surprised by it, so he couldn't resist and accepted the little sweet present. Yurick got embarrassed and blushed, but that didn't stop him from thanking the girl. He walked and chewed a cookie that servants usually eat. It was not quite clear whether he liked liver or not, but nevertheless he bit into it and chewed it, and then spit it out violently. This abuse of the cookie offended Anissa. The look on Yurick's face was strange. He thought some kind of poison had been added to the cookie, but the little girl didn't want to believe it. The best part was that the boy thought the little girl had poisoned the cookie, so she gave it to him. They were walking down the hallway. The boy kept accusing the little girl, so she reached for the cookie. So to prove to the boy that the cookie was edible, Anissa took a bite of the cookie, and the boy skewered her with fear and surprise. Nothing has happened to her yet. Yurick shouted and asked Anissa to spit out the cookie, but she wasn't going to do it, because the girl wanted him to start trusting her. Little girl swallowed a piece. The boy was frightened. He thought it was a poison cookie Dietrich had given her, and asked her to give it to him, but the girl had eaten it herself. Now he was worried that the little girl might die. But the point was that Dietrich hadn't given her anything, or asked her for anything. The boy didn't understand anything, and if he didn't understand it correctly, so he turned the girl upside down and tried to shake her. Yurick shook her and asked her to spit it out, but the girl was sure that the cookies weren't poisoned, so she didn't want to spit it out. At that moment, someone grabbed Yurick's shoulder. Dietrich came to his sister's aid, wondering what was going on, but Yurick froze and didn't answer. Yurick let go of the girl, and she fell to the floor, at which point Dietrich reached for her. Dietrich repeated his question, and Yurick shouted in panic that the girl had swallowed poison. Dietrich was angry, and the only thing he asked was if Yurick had given Anissa poison. Yurick was frightened, for Dietrich's aura color was coal black, a man who was ready to kill. But Yurick shouted out of his last strength that he was not a coward like their brother Galen and did not kill little children. But Dietrich was still sure that it was Yurick who gave the girl the poison. But his opponent claimed that it was Dietrich who ordered her to poison him. Anissa noticed that the situation had escalated and decided to crawl out of there. The brothers continued to fight, accusing and insulting each other. Dietrich didn't understand why he wanted to poison his brother, because even if he did become a candidate, he would be quickly removed from the list. This made Yurick angry. The boy's auras became dangerously coloured, and the girl found it very hard to breathe. So she decided to go, at which point Yurick noticed her manoeuvre and asked the logical question about why she gave him the cookies. Malishka only smiled. At that moment, Yurick thought that the girl had given him a cookie for nothing. Anissa didn't have time to crawl away, and only turned around at the boy's voice. Yurick went around Dietrich and asked the girl if she had given him a cookie out of the goodness of her heart. The boy crouched beside the little girl, not understanding her motives. Dietrich watched the scene. The little girl could not yet explain to him in words that she wanted to be a little friendlier to him, since he would be helping her brother in the future. So the boy and the girl glared at each other. Since Anissa couldn't explain it in words yet, she decided to do it the way she could. She decided to hug the boy because she wanted him to love her a little too. And there she was, clutching Yurick in her arms. But the boy's reaction puzzled the girl. He flinched and then froze. So the little girl pulled away and saw Yurick enveloped in a pure green aura, the meaning of which Anissa did not yet know. After that, Yurick grabbed the girl's hand. He apologized because he had no idea that Anissa had given him the cookies for nothing. Now the girl understood what the colour of the boy's aura meant. It was gratitude. So now the boy was stroking her head and thanking her for giving him a cookie. Yurick, though thanking, but doing so in a way that was not particularly appropriate, as he mentioned that this castle was very poor, and he thought Dietrich and the others had no cookies left, and in general the place was inhabited by only slaves. The boy apologised for spitting out such a precious cookie. Yes, it sounded all a bit weird, but quite sincere. Yurick and Anissa shook hands, so she decided to forget how he had turned her upside down. At that moment, Dietrich took his sister in his arms and asked Yurick what he had forgotten in a place like Castle Dahlia. His voice was soaked with anger. Then the boy let the girl go to the floor, and she pondered why Dietrich was angry. Then Yurick spoke. He had come to challenge his brother in a game he had lost last time. The girl did not understand why he decided to repeat the battle, the result of which was unequivocal last time, and Dietrich asked if he wanted to be buried in the ground again. And then Dietrich further embarrassed his brother by noting that he had interesting preferences. Yurick was thinking optimistically, thinking that since he wasn't dead, they had a draw. To this, Dietrich said that that one was a loser, and he had personally eliminated 2 heir candidates. At this point, Yurick decided to hit his brother, but the latter dodged and asked why he should waste his strength on someone like his opponent. Yurick continued to druka, or rather tried to hit Dietrich, but he dodged again. The only thing Dietrich did was to trip up his brother, and he fell for the trick. The boy stumbled and fell to the floor. Dietrich menacingly asked Yurick, calling him Euclid, to stay out of his way, the latter shivering. Yurick was already on his knees. He was indignant because his last name was Lagrange. Yurick felt that his brother was looking down on him, so he lunged forward to attack again. But suddenly Yurick felt something, a shadow that appeared near his feet. The shadow that Dietrich controlled lifted the boy high up. Anissa looked on in admiration, for with this power Dietrich had defeated Yurick, who was now lying on his back on the floor. Dietrich continued to twirl the boy as he pleased with the help of the shadow. Anissa couldn't understand why the boys were feuding now, because in the original book, they were good with each other. The girl was afraid that they would kill each other, so she crawled up to Dietrich and started tugging at the hem of his clothes. So the girl wanted her brother to stop bullying Yurick, because without his help, it would be very difficult for them to get rid of Derek. But her brother didn't understand what she was trying to say yet. But soon Dietrich realized what was going on and lowered his brother to the floor. Yurick was trembling, and Dietrich told him that their father's mother was also a slave. After a brief battle, Dietrich warned Yurick not to come back to this house and talk nonsense, then turned and walked away. And Anissa noticed that Yurick was about to cry. This behaviour did not please Anissa. The girl crawled after him, for her plan was to share milk with him and thus get closer to him. But the boy kept getting farther away from her, and she reached out to him because she couldn't catch up. The girl called out to her brother, but he paid no attention to her. She screamed even louder and farted all over the hallway. It wasn't what she wanted to do, but the point wasn't really about the gases, not just with them. Anissa was trembling, for she wanted to do it again, and then she farted a second time. Both boys looking at her. Anissa took it as a personal tragedy. The situation was very embarrassing for the girl. She blushed and began to pray. She asked to protect her dignity, but realized the boys had heard everything. But the boys stared at her intently. They were stammering with only one question. What in God's name was she doing now? Anissa tried not to react to their words. She wanted them to go away as soon as possible. But Dietrich did his own thing. He came to her and took her in his arms, though the girl covered her face and thought that he was the most tactless man of them all. Dietrich stared at the girl's face in silence and then said that the most important thing was that she didn't smell, or rather didn't stink, and then asked if he could change her diaper. After these words, Anissa started waving her arms and legs with all her might, trying to get away, and the boy began to guess that she did not want him to do it. But Dietrich insisted because otherwise she would stink. Anissa was trembling with embarrassment and anger because she was carrying him her milk and he wants to do this to her now. Meanwhile, the boy noticed a kind of bandage in the form of an improvised bag on her shoulder and asked something like this. The boy realized that his sister was carrying some of her milk to him again, but the girl only turned away because she thought he had spoiled everything. Dietrich was sure that Anissa had come to him to feed him, but she was too offended to agree at this point. The boy looked at Yurick, who was still standing in the hallway, and noticed that she had given him a cookie. He then tilted his head slightly and asked if there was a cookie for him. The boy looked quite cute at this point, and Anissa assumed he was a bit offended by her. So she reached into her pocket with the supplies, but there were already crumbs in there. The little girl unclenched her fist, and cookie crumbs fell to the floor. This embarrassed the girl even more, and she began to actively look elsewhere. But instead of cookies, she held out her milk to the boy, but he was in no hurry to take the bottle, even though the little girl insisted. But as a result of the shaking, the lid came off the bottle, and it and all its contents flew into Dietrich. Now there was a puddle of milk at the boy's feet, and a baby bottle lying around milk dripped down Dietrich's clothes and hair. Silence hung in the hallway. The boy lowered his sister to the floor. She didn't know what to do. He wiped milk from her face with his sleeve, and the little girl assumed she was a corpse. Anissa was frightened. She asked God to rebirth her in an adequate family. But Dietrich didn't look like he was going to kill her yet. Just got out a handkerchief and cleaned himself up. Plus he was about to say something to his sister. Namely, he pointed out that in such situations, the perpetrator should apologize. Anissa was glad she wasn't going to be killed today, and smiled at her brother. Dietrich insisted on apologizing, and his sister thought enough of the baby, aha. The boy decided to be lenient and consider it an accident. The girl nodded vigorously in agreement. Yurick had been watching this scene, and now Dietrich's attention was on him. The boy shuddered. Yurick got embarrassed and started to walk away. Anissa watched him with a mute question, and the boy didn't just walk away. He ran away from them, but it all ended well. Several years passed. It was hard to say exactly how many, but Anissa had grown up well. But money and food were still just as much of a problem at Castle Dahlia, but it was in this house that her second spring came. The girl was still being looked after by Lancel, so it was to him that she went to ask for a snack. She wanted something to chew on, but the servant offered the girl milk again. The man laid down on the sofa to rest. As he was tired, and milk is a food that is quite difficult to get, the girl was holding the bottle and didn't understand him. The problem was that the girl wasn't getting enough milk, so she was angry, and Lancel was already dozing off, and the girl slapped him on the cheek, but he didn't even wake up. Anissa decided at this point to go to the kitchen, because she was getting tired of all this, but there was no one there. Suddenly she smelled something. It was the jar of chocolates she thought Lancel had left for himself. She opened the lid, hoping she could eat it all before the servant came, and as she ate the first bite, A servant came into the kitchen. Jenny looked angry. The maid started yelling at the girl who was eating sweets. She was pointing her finger and resenting it because it was chocolate candy. At that moment, Anissa realized it was Jenny's candy. The woman began to snatch the box from the girl's hands, reproaching her for eating someone else's food. Baby wouldn't let go of the jar and said she hadn't eaten anything. Jenny kept cursing and wouldn't let go of the candy. She ended up snatching the candy jar out of the girl's hands. It made the candy scatter, falling on the floor and choking on the candy. The woman resented it, and the girl looked at the floor in silence. The girl just wanted to eat, so she wanted the maid to give her some food, for she would eat less than what fell on the floor. Anissa licked the chocolate off her fingers and wanted more. The hunger wouldn't go away, and Jenny started picking candy off the floor. So the little girl reached for the jar again. But Jenny slapped her pen, saying it was hers. The girl felt sad and hurt, so tears came to her eyes. Jenny continued to scold the girl, and couldn't understand what Lancel was teaching her, and why she was crying now, and the little girl was already crying because she hadn't even been fed much, and now she was being told off. But the maid thought this behaviour was silly, since she was a thief, so she shouldn't be crying. The woman started pulling her cheeks, hurting her. It was a punishment. The woman said she would always punish the girl if she did something bad, but she resented it, saying she just wanted to eat. The woman then let her go and asked if Lancel was feeding her. Anissa replied that Lancel only fed her milk, but the maid turned away and said she didn't care, and said she would lock the door to the kitchen. But the girl ran up to the maid at the last minute, grabbed her by the edge of her dress, and crying, said she was very hungry. Jenny looked at the little girl and demanded that she speak correctly. But Anissa was still having trouble pronouncing the letters, but that didn't matter to Jenny. The woman then pulled the edge of her dress and mouthed that the girl needed to be like her brother, go to the forest, kill animals and eat them. The little girl was shocked at such a thing. The maid left and the girl fell to the floor and cried. Anissa had no choice but to leave the kitchen and go into the garden, hoping to find some fruit, since it was springtime. And then she realized that she was lost, but she kept walking. But since it was early spring, there was not only no fruit, but also no flowers in the garden. Little didn't understand how one could live in such conditions, with such an attitude, as even Dietrich with his outstanding abilities had a hard time. And then Anissa saw Dietrich at the fountain, who was going to roast a game on the fire. The girl went over to her brother and sat next to him by the fire. She even thought that the boy had gained a little weight. Yes, such a result, feeding the boy milk, was worth all the effort on her part. They sat in silence and watched the bird cook beautifully. The sight made the girl salivate profusely as it looked very appetizing. Anissa wiped away her drool and apologized to her brother for looking gross. At that moment, the boy then handed her the roast meat. Dietrich offered Anissa to eat it, but the girl refused, telling her brother to eat it himself. He did not refuse and began to bite and chew the meat himself. While the girl looked at him in surprise, the little girl realized that Dietrich would not repeat himself twice and would not offer either. Anissa knew that she should have agreed, but now she could only ask him if he liked it or not. Anissa was sad because she wanted to eat too, and Dietrich chewed so vigorously and said that he tasted good, and she could only be happy for him. The boy had eaten almost all of it, and there was a ridge left and a little meat on it, which only said that his brother was not going to leave her a little bit. The boy looked at his sister. Dietrich asked his sister what was wrong with her face. The little girl complained that her cheek had been pinched. She admitted that a maid had done it. The boy looked at his sister and realized it was Jenny, but he was curious about the reason for the act. The girl confessed that she wanted to eat the maid's chocolates because she was hungry. To Dietrich, it all became clear. Boy got up, he was going somewhere. Girl got up too. She asked her brother where he was going. Dietrich looked at her and said he was going to the palace. The girl decided to go with him. And the boy looked at her and realized that he was looking at her hair, which looked like cotton candy. But he stopped his sister and asked her to wait for him in the garden near the fountain. She had only to obey. And the boy had already disappeared into the bushes, and now he was standing near the door of the castle. The boy was wrapped in a black aura. He remembered being told that the girl must survive at all costs. Dietrich used the shadows to open the door. The maid was frightened, so the shadows crept into the room. The guy looked intimidating. The shadow grabbed the woman by the throat and squeezed it. The woman fell to her knees. Dietrich approached her, saying he didn't care if she and Lancel were stealing his money or not. Also, he didn't care about her looking down on him. But the fact that they starve his sister to death is another matter entirely. Yes, he also agreed that the girl is very annoying at times. But despite all that, he didn't wish her to starve to death. Anissa sat in the garden waiting for her brother, but he was still not there, so she was shivering and thought he was a liar. It was already getting evening. She was cold, and she was afraid she would die of cold faster than of hunger. Castor also went out. The girl got up. She made up her mind to go to the palace too, but suddenly the little girl cried bitter tears, and she ran away from the fountain, for she was cold and very hungry. And then an interesting thing happened. The servant brought the girl a bun just as she wanted. Anissa accepted the scone as a super prize. Since it was finally something to munch on, she thanked Lance, and he also brought her some milk to drink. The girl glowed with pleasure and happiness. She started to eat and realized why Yurick was happy to get a cookie. It was morning, and the girl was glad to have more bread to share with her brother. And then she found Dietrich, who asked her what she wanted from him. Anissa brought her brother some milk and asked him to drink it, the boy being in his room. But the boy was hard to please, so the little girl started looking for something in her pocket. The girl took out a bag of cookies and handed them to her brother. She asked Dietrich to eat them. The boy looked at her, for he wondered where she had gotten the cookies. Anissa winked at her brother and told him what she had stolen. The girl bragged, and the guy only covered his eyes and sighed. But the brother decided he would drink the milk, and he left the cookies for his sister, so he removed the lid and drank its contents in a volley. The girl looked pleased. She wanted her brother to grow up big and strong, but a villain. The little girl hoped everything would be okay. She also thought about how he would treat her better if she took care of him now. The boy drank it all and handed the bottle to his sister, while Anissa hoped that all the effort she had put in wouldn't go to waste. After she fed her brother, she decided to go back to her room. Suddenly Dietrich called out to his sister, and she froze like a stiff. The girl was outraged that he called her as a stranger, not even by her name. The boy beckoned her over to him, and the little girl realized that he didn't know her name. She ran up to her little brother and called out her name, eliciting a slightly incomprehensive look from her little brother. Dietrich didn't really know what it meant, and the girl mumbled that Anissa was her name. And then he held out his hand to her with a clenched fist. He opened it, and there was a cherry. The boy asked if she could eat something like that or not. Anissa took a cherry and said she could eat it. The girl thanked her brother and thought she already liked him. It made her happy. Dietrich looked excited too and accepted the girl's thanks with dignity. At this point, the little girl happily ate the berry. The boy noticed that at this point the girl looked like a chicken. This remark embarrassed her, and Dietrich asked about whether she would have more berries. Whether to give her the rest, she agreed, and he handed her 3 more berries, and the girl was glad that he thought she was a chicken, and therefore nice. Anissa took the berries in her hands and began to eat them with both cheeks, even tears in the corners of her eyes from the pleasure, which surprised her brother a little. She did not cry, but she could not dream of such deliciousness, as they always had only bread and milk as food. The girl tried to explain to her brother that she was not crying, but that these tears were from happiness, as it was very tasty, and held out 1 berry to him. Dietrich stared at her, and couldn't tell if all children were like her. The girl thought he was attracted to her cuteness. But the guy didn't know the answer to this statement. Since all the other children except hers were dead, it frightened her, for he too suddenly started talking about such horrible things. The little girl decided to pretend she didn't hear any of this and sat down next to her brother. But it happened that as she sat down, the blanket moved and the girl began to fall, and couldn't help myself. The girl was already puffing like a locomotive. The guy grabbed the girl and kept her from falling to the floor and sat her on the bed next to him. Anissa looked at him and thought about the fact that the boy was now beginning to treat her much kinder, which could be called the effect of mere exposure. Because every day when Lancel left the girl alone, she would always go to Dietrich and spend time with him, just like now, so she did get the Velcro effect. Anissa thought all her efforts had succeeded. But abruptly, Dietrich recoiled and sat down on the other edge of the bed. But the girl moved toward him, grabbed his hands and thanked him for his hospitality. But the girl would not let him go, clung to him, and thanked him for everything, especially the cherries. Dietrich tried to push his sister away, but she clung to him tightly, and the girl could not believe that the man who had so carefully kept berries for her could become a villain, but now the little girl was teaching him to do good deeds. Now she clung to her brother with her whole body and said she liked him very much, but the boy didn't understand what to make of it. And the girl didn't understand why he was so cold. She was so sweet. Anissa still didn't understand why he didn't think she was cute, but the boy asked sharply if she wanted more cherries. The girl nodded affirmatively, and Dietrich gave her some more berries that he had gotten from another palace, and then added that they didn't seem to be poisoned. The little girl trembled. She didn't understand how dare he give her berries that could possibly kill her, and he just looked straight ahead. Yet Anissa wouldn't let the berries out of his hands and wanted him to give her all her milk back since he was doing this. So there was one rule in the game of heirs for a place in the family. No killing servants, and no more, which meant that any method could be used to get rid of other children. She gazed at the ripe berries, realizing that food poisoning is common here, occurring several days a week. But even knowing this, the little girl would not throw the cherries away, trembling, and the boy would watch her. The girl started crying because she thought she might die, and her brother mocked her even at that moment. Dietrich was in a great mood, reporting that the game of killing brothers was over and she had nothing more to fear. He also said that among the candidates, everyone knew that he wouldn't die from the poison the little girl picked up on the fact that her brother was saying this while laughing, which was a little odd. The boy's resistance to poisons was due to his mother Camille poisoning her son with small doses every day. It was some kind of family tradition that even in a book, when read, was abhorrent. Thinking about it, Anissa became despondent as she couldn't understand this not quite adequate family at that moment. Servants entered the room. Now there was a new maid working in the house, Mevin, that is Marilyn, who was looking for the girl and found her brother in the room. Anissa was happy to see her, as the new maid was treating her well and even playing with her, so the girl hugged her. Anissa and Mevin smiled at each other. The maid and the girl smiled at each other, the woman thinking her mistress a very pretty child, while the boy watched them and grew more sullen as they chirped loudly and speculated about what Lancel was doing without looking after the girl. Suddenly, Anissa felt her brother's cold gaze on her. But nevertheless, the brother's aura was grey, but something wasn't quite right. Mevin at this point said she would take the girl to her room. This girl was the first adult Anissa had become attached to. This girl replaced the previous mustard girl, which was better for Dietrich as well. The maid took the girl in her arms to carry her to her room. The girl waved goodbye to him, but the boy remained sitting with a straight back on the RHF. Of his bed, the girl was not thinking well of her brother at this moment, and Marilyn said she would come to him as soon as she carried Anissa to her room. The maid carried the girl away. They laughed, and Dietrich sat still and unmoving. The girl thought this girl was the only adequate person in the whole castle. The boy was walking in the garden afterward and turned around at his sister's voice. She ran to Dietrich in a beautiful dress, and he was sitting as usual on the edge of the fountain, but the boy did not react to her shouting and waving his arms and froze in place with surprise. Anissa was getting angry because the boy had started correcting her pronunciation. But it wasn't just the pronunciation. It was the fact that her new maid had left, and she had told her so. The boy sat quietly on the edge of the fountain, while the little girl pestered him about Marilyn going somewhere, and she wanted to know where, and Dietrich kept teasing her without answering her question. Anissa was worried because only Dietrich and Marilyn had normal contact with her in this house. Marilyn also thought the girl was beautiful, but she was glad that her brother had stopped ignoring her, and the boy never came to her first. And the girl read her fairy tales, played dolls with her. The girl at this point needed to develop and learn as much as she could about the world and what was not written in the book about the world. Dietrich replied. It turned out that the maid had been transferred to another castle for the time being. Anissa frowned. She wanted to know when the girl would return to them, but the boy didn't know the answer to that question or pretended he didn't. The girl almost cried from the over-exaggeration of her feelings. The boy leaned toward her, and she thought that he probably thought she was a crybaby. Dietrich wondered why the maid liked the girl so much, then explained that it was because the woman read her fairy tales and told her different stories from life. Dietrich thought about it and decided that the girl needed more toys. There was a patch of shadow on the lawn that Dietrich had summoned, but the girl didn't quite mean it. In addition, a magic circle appeared in the shadows. One thing was clear so far. It was a magic summoning circle, but it was not clear what the boy was summoning. At that moment, Bale, the demon king, appeared from the circle and approached Dietrich, asking if he had summoned him or not. Dietrich asked the demon to play with Anissa, a statement that left him shocked. The boy repeated his order. He once again said that the demon should play with the girl because she was bored. Anissa shuddered. She didn't understand how her brother could ask such a creature to do such a thing. Bale asked if he understood the order correctly. It turned out that he did. The girl was already thinking that she was no longer bored. Anissa was frightened. She saw the creature's aura, which was imbued with the smell of death, and Bale accepted the order for execution. Somehow a rattle magically appeared in the demon's hand. He looked at the girl and asked if he should shake the thing. The girl said no, but Bale didn't listen to her and started shaking the rattles at will like at a disco. Suddenly the little girl realized that she was beginning to like this strange rhythm. She didn't want to show her admiration, but she couldn't help herself. Dietrich looked pleased. The next day, Anissa questioned Lancel, and he told her that the maid had been dismissed, but he did not know the reasons or details, and in general, he did not understand why the girl was so worried about a common maid. But to the girl, she was the person who treated her fairly and with care. For the first time, Lancel heard the little mistress call him an idiot. He even raised himself on the sofa. The man was offended, so he blackmailed her with food, saying he forgot to order. He smirked smugly and said that the girl would have to starve today. This caused a negative reaction from the child, and Lancel quietly walked away and left her alone in the room with that thought. The girl shuddered. She didn't understand why the servant was still alive. The girl didn't understand why her father had fired the good Marilyn and not the villainous Lancel. In such a situation, Anissa decided that she had to tell Dietrich about everything, and she went to his room and was going to knock on the door. But she remembered that he asked her not to bother him for nothing, but it was important to her, so she went into her brother's room without knocking. Suddenly, she was almost blown away by a gust of wind. All the windows in the boy's room were open, why the girl did not know. She thought it was silly, for there was no coal or firewood in this castle. Anissa was getting cold. She realized that her brother was not in the room. But where he could have gone, she did not know. But suddenly she heard a strange sound, and realized that it was her brother. He was in the room but didn't answer, so she ran to look for him. She walked over to the bed and called out to her brother. The boy clearly had a fever. It was obvious he was sick, so the girl decided to pull the blanket over him. He had little idea what she was doing or what was even going on. The little girl covered him up, but Dietrich did not appreciate her gesture and chased her away. The boy asked for the blanket to be removed, but his sister was not going to do so, as the room was very cold, and generally she needed medicine to cure him. Anissa argued with Dietrich and was not going to leave him alone as he was sick, and she was worried about his condition. The boy had a headache in addition to the fever, and her sister decided to get him some water. The little girl found a bowl of water left for washing, which was good, but she couldn't understand how Dietrich could be left alone like that. The girl decided to give her brother a cold compress. She twisted the towel badly, so the water ran down the boy's face, for which she apologized. Dietrich, however, removed the compress from his forehead and threw it on the floor, as he did not want Anissa to help him. But this had no effect on his sister, and she put the cloth back on his forehead, thanking him for wringing it out. So Anissa wasn't going to leave, and even lay down next to her brother. He had to accept it. She also decided to hug the boy to keep him warm. Then she showed her brother how to hug himself if there was no one else to hug. The girl continued to lie down, and the boy found the strength to sit up in bed suddenly. He took his sister by the dress, asking her to move away. He put his sister in a chair, saying she was too noisy and gave him a headache. The girl looked at him again and realized that he was very sick and promised not to make any noise. The boy went back to bed and lay down. The girl told her brother that the door had magically closed, but it was not quite true, for the boy had closed it himself. He went to the door. He opened it and asked what the girl wanted. Dietrich saw an interesting picture of a girl sitting in a room, stacking twigs in the likeness of a fire. He noted that he asked her to be quiet, and the girl said she was quiet. Anissa gathered up all her twigs and looked at her brother with a smile, wondering why she had brought them all here, but she replied that she had brought them for him as firewood. Dietrich did not quite understand what was going on, for on the one hand he thought the girl was stupid, and on the other hand He thought that perhaps it was he who was stupid because of his illness. He turned around and went to his room and told the girl to do whatever she wanted. It was night. Anissa decided to sleep with her brother tonight. She was asleep, but Dietrich wasn't. He was lying there with his eyes open, which was good, because a knife flew at him. Dietrich blocked the attack with summoned shadows. Whereupon Dietrich jumped up from the bed. The murderer was surprised and frightened, and rightly so. The boy used the shadow as a weapon and struck a blow at his enemy. In this situation, Dietrich was annoyed that he was not allowed to sleep in peace. Dietrich was also happy that his sister was sound asleep and not awake. The boy also went to bed. He looked at his sister and thought that she was very stupid and naive, because the maid she liked so much had been planted to kill her. The boy didn't understand why the girl liked the woman so much, and Bale didn't, who was superior to her in everything, and she liked sleeping in his bed. He couldn't understand his sister. Dietrich looked at her and went over the reasons in his head. He thought that maybe it was because she had no talents and was trying to survive, but no one could tell her that she could survive under his protection. He had the impression that the girl was aware of his situation from the beginning. Perhaps that's what influenced his decision to protect his sister at all costs. For this, he also decided to sacrifice the most important thing, and it was related to the last task in the heir candidates. He needed to forget about humanity if he wanted to become a duke. Their family was protected by the demon Asmodeus. The demon wanted the head of the family to be like him, a man who only cared about his power to that end. Lovers, friends, family members were sacrificed to Asmodeus to become the next duke. The boy was afraid he wouldn't have anything important. At this point, he heard a voice saying that he would end up like his ancestor, Rodrigue Lagrange. Demon said Roderick was far more suited than Derek to be head of the family, but he had nothing and no one dear to sacrifice. Besides, he thought this girl had come along at just the right time. He insisted that the boy treasure this child. The boy's only concern was whether they could deceive his father. The demon said they could. The demon assured him they could fool Asmodeus too, because people value their family. But still, the boy should not keep her too close to him. This sounded like a sneer to Dietrich, as he didn't quite understand whose safety was more important, hers or his. Even the demon felt sorry for the girl who slept soundly. Dietrich sheltered her, but also admitted that he had planned from the beginning to sacrifice her to be the heir. He stroked the girl's head and felt something prick his heart. He mistook it for a poisoning he had missed. Life at Castle Dahlia continued. Now Bale would come and feed the little mistress, and the milk he gave her was different flavours. This time it was strawberry. It was hard to deny that this creepy-looking demon was a pretty good babysitter, because as soon as he shook her bottle of milk, it changed its flavour. The girl was surprised that Bale kept calling her a princess, because what kind of princess was she? But when she objected, he insisted on his own. By his logic, since she was his king's little sister, she was a princess. The demon explained that he is the king of demons, and he is subject to the great king of demons, and this is the man he has chosen as Dietrich. Thus the boy is the king and the girl is the princess. Anissa marvelled at such a thing, because her brother was only 7 years old, and he had already been chosen as his master by the demon king himself. She thought Bale liked her brother for real, but that wasn't quite the right conclusion. Nevertheless, the demon had already pulled out the books to read. Bale lifted the girl into the air, moved her into his lap, and was about to read books, as Marilyn had done. For that was what his king had said. The girl sat down on a part of the demon's body that was much softer than it looked. Books flew around the girl, and she squinted at Bale where she shouldn't, because he reminded her of a marshmallow. The demon asked her not to do that as she was touching his intimate place. Anissa instantly pulled her hand away and changed her face. Now everything was fine, but she couldn't choose a book to read as all of them were familiar to her. Maybe it was because she was in the book world herself. But still, she chose the one about the rabbit and the moon. Demon smiled. He liked this book too. There was a knock on the door. Bale decided to vaporize so no outsiders would see him. He was doing this to save his reputation as a demon king, and the role of babysitter was not conducive to that, so he decided to leave now and come again later. He disappeared silently. She was called out the door, and it was a familiar voice. The little girl recognized it. It belonged to Marilyn, who had been kicked out. She jumped up and ran to the doors. The doors opened, and a girl appeared. but something caused surprise in Anissa's eyes. It was about the strange colour of the girl's aura. She did say that when Dietrich fired her, she had to go north. Now she was back in the castle and approached the girl and beckoned her to come with her. The little girl froze and did not obey the maid's insistent commands. She realised something was wrong here. Marilyn noticed that the girl was not approaching, but instead moving away from her. She got tired of waiting and grabbed the little girl's hand. She pulled Anissa behind her, calling for her brother's help. The maid was frightened, stopped, began to calm and reassure the girl that everything would be all right, but Marilyn's gaze was clouded and scared the child away. Anissa thought that the reason for the maid's strange behaviour was her aura. So when the maid hugged her, the girl decided to try and clear the girl's aura. So the girl began the cleansing process. It caused the maid incredible pain. She screamed as she did so. She clenched the child in her arms to the point of pain. But the girl didn't stop. She only covered one eye. Marilyn was almost falling, holding her heart. She was in a lot of pain, but the girl was glad that she had already cleared part of the maid's aura. Anissa continued. She needed to put a little more effort into making the girl's aura completely clear. Yes, she had succeeded, only the maid was unconscious on the floor. Anissa couldn't understand why this process was causing Marilyn so much pain. It was so different with Lancel. The maid began to regain consciousness and rise. Shaking, the little girl tried to reach for her. Marilyn began to cry. She blamed herself for everything, she read. The girl didn't understand why she was acting this way. She began to apologize to the little girl, but she looked at her incomprehensibly, because nothing had happened. The maid was already in tears. The girl tried to comfort her by hugging her, but then Marilyn threw something against the wall. Anissa wanted to run to the maid's aid, but was stopped by a familiar hand. It was Dietrich, who absolutely calmly informed the girl at the wall that she did not value her life at all. The maid looked at the young lord with tears in her eyes. Frightened, Dietrich held his sister in his arms. She was as usual displeased with his behaviour and in a fit of righteous anger. After she had personally cleansed her maid's aura, the latter bowed and apologised to the boy. The maid admitted that she served Lady Leatrix. Leatrix was Derek Lagrange's first wife, Yurick's mother, and a woman who never loses the boy stood his ground. He realised that she was a spy, but the girl didn't want to believe it, because her Marilyn was very kind and sweet. Boy lifts maid with one hand. Dietrich was about to kill Marilyn, but his sister started pulling his hair and begging him not to. But the boy was adamant, and told his sister to stay out of his way. Anissa could think of nothing better than to cover the maid with herself because she didn't want her brother to kill her. The maid was crying. She said the girl didn't understand, and asked only that she be punished, while Anissa asked that Marilyn not be killed. She assured the boy that she was controlled by Lady Leatrix. She was aided by the demon Veronica, the dead daughter of the mistress, and Marilyn didn't want to do it because she loved the young mistress so much. Dietrich didn't believe her because he knew she couldn't break the spell of a powerful demon like Veronica. The girl thought the demon had lifted its own spell, as she could not now feel the fog that had been in her mind earlier. It looked like nonsense to the boy, and Anissa pondered whether she should tell him that she had been blessed by the goddess Erida and had been able to clear the maid's aura. But the girl was afraid to do so, as this confession was her way into slavery to Dietrich, like the main character in the book she had fallen into. So the girl decided to cry, as it was the only thing she could do in hopes that her brother would understand her feelings, and also stated that she would hate him if he killed the maid. Anissa was crying her eyes out, saying that from now on she would hate him and would not share her milk with him. And she also threatened to tell everyone about Bale. It was all making the boy very angry. At this point, Marilyn fell to her knees and begged the young master to give her a second chance. She promised not to report him and Anissa to Lady Leatrix again. The little girl walked over to her and tried to lift her. Dietrich gave up, turned around and walked away from her sister's room. Merlin and Anissa embraced, happy that it was over without blood and death. The girl comforted the maid and was glad that the blackmail of Baal's person had worked. For the demon has the power to oppose the sun god, so this information must be kept secret until Dietrich becomes duke. The boy was walking down the castle corridor and remembering the girl's last words. They brought a smile. He also couldn't understand what was so wonderful about this maid who was spying on them to defend her like that. The young lord thought this threat from his sister was foolish and childish, but the thought crept into his head that the girl believed in the power of her words. It was much more trivial. He was too lazy to waste his energy and deal with the spy at that moment. To Dietrich, the girl was something of a sacrifice to pass the final test. She wasn't even a member of his family, but he kept thinking about the fact that she promised to hate him. He wasn't going to stop because Anissa had decided to get in his way. Another year had passed. Anissa was now 3 and Bale was teaching her in the garden how to wield a small sword. He noted her success with the sword, and the girl thought she had talent. The demon gave her sound advice about making sure there were no gaps in the defense when she raised the sword. All of his advice was good, and overall Bale was a great teacher who liked cookies a lot. In this training battle, Bale decided to give in to her when the girl attacked him. He fell to the grass, pretending to lose, when in fact the girl hadn't even hit him. She didn't really like that kind of pretense. The girl got angry and staggered away, since Bale didn't even try during the training session. In addition, the demon kept sweating, which the girl didn't like either, since he was dirty. After that, Bale decided to mess with Dietrich a little and told Anissa that it was the boy who wouldn't let him fight his sister seriously. The girl got angry, threw down her sword and strode away, as the demon wouldn't tell her the details, but he looked after her and said that they should get along anyway. She was walking through the garden and suddenly discovered a door in the wall. She was very curious where it led to. At first she wanted to ask permission to look, but then she realized that Dietrich, Marilyn and Bale would not let her do so. So she climbed through without resolution, realizing that the hole probably led to another garden, and it was true, but the difference was noticeable. This place was luxurious. Even the statue at the fountain had diamond eyes, so the girl was thinking of stealing one eye to improve the position of the Dahlia Palace. At this point, Anissa realized that this garden belonged to Lady Leatrix, so she decided to run away from there quickly, and then she heard a voice calling her a little brat. Anissa had barely gotten her feet and was sitting under the fence. But there were no sounds of blows coming from behind the wall, but there was no screaming or crying. Someone was cursing and telling the man to close his blue eyes if he didn't want to lose them. But the girl realized that it was none of her business. At this point, the girl realized who she was talking about, and it was true that on the other side of the fence, a group of boys were beating Yurick, who had his head covered, and they were also verbally abusing him and saying that he was a disgrace to the house of Leatrice, because he couldn't even throw a single punch at Dietrich. Anissa looked through the hole at what was going on, while the boys were about to leave, leaving their victim behind. She only wanted to confirm her hunch, but now she saw Yurick, beaten and seemingly crying alone. Seeing all this, Anissa made her way over to the boy, who, hearing a rustle, jumped up and flinched. The girl hadn't seen him in a long time, so now she was surprised at how much her acquaintance had grown. She crawled over to him and sat next to him, then asked him how much his wound hurt. The boy looked puzzled, so the girl reminded him of her name again, because she thought he had forgotten it. Yurick asked what she was doing here, and how she had gotten here, since she was Dietrich's younger sister. The boy got up and repeated his question, but the little girl answered simply that she was bored at home. Then she pointed her finger at the hole in the fence she had climbed through. Yurick grabbed her arm and pulled her towards the hole. As it was dangerous for her to be in this garden, he said she would be killed if she was seen here. The girl didn't understand why. The fact was that the girl belonged to the house of Dahlia, and the rest of his brothers hate anyone who has anything to do with her house, especially dangerous to her Alphonse, as he hates Dietrich the most. Anissa knew that Alphonse was Leatrice's eldest son, and that there was a strong rivalry between him and Dietrich, but she was more concerned about Yurick's attitude towards her brother. The boy was agitated. Anissa realized that he was soft-hearted, and it might be worth changing the subject for the time being. She chose the new topic poorly too, as she asked why these guys were beating him up since he wasn't from the Dahlia house. The reason for the beatings was his blue eyes. At this point, the girl pulled him towards her and stared into his eyes. And then the boy broke free and got embarrassed, and she finished him off by telling him that he had very beautiful eyes. The little girl pulled him toward the fountain, saying his eyes were beautiful. Anissa made him look at his reflection in the water, but the boy didn't agree with her. He thought his eyes were terrible like their enemies from the south, but the girl didn't understand him. After all, no one should care about anyone else's opinion. The boy still said he didn't like his eye colour. Anissa realized that the children and the entire Lagrange family hated Southerners. Then she heard a voice behind her, Dietrich, approaching them. The boy walked up to his sister and asked her again what she was doing here. The boy thought Yurick had dragged her here. The girl covered Yurick with herself, as she had come here on her own because she was bored at home. Dietrich didn't understand how she could be bored. He glared at his sister and reminded her that she had Bale, whom she could use as a toy. But to the girl, the demon was a nurse and a teacher. Baby decided to change the subject and asked who hit her brother, but the answer was no one. The girl insisted that the boy tell her the name of her abuser so she could get revenge on him. Dietrich was curious as to how she would do. She told him that Bale had taught her how to wield a sword so she would train and be able to defend him. Dietrich was amused by this statement. After that, he took his sister in his arms and went to the house. Yurick watched them follow. Yurick realized that the rumor was true. Dietrich had a dear man. No one believed that Dietrich could care for anyone, especially this little girl. But the picture Yurick saw now spoke of something else. Yurick realized he had to report this to his mother. He thought about finding his brother's weakness and making him hesitate. At that moment, Anissa smiled and waved at him. At this moment, Yurick clenched his fists. He didn't understand why the girl was doing this. A few days passed. Anissa lay in her room and thought. She had been living in this world for 3 years and had never been anywhere but Castle Dahlia and the neighbouring garden. And then she made a decision, sat down and asked her maid if she could go visit Vaughan Castle. Marilyn said there seemed to be no prohibition against it, so she decided to take the girl with her. They came to Vaughan Castle. The maid put the girl on a park bench and asked her to wait there while she picked up groceries from an acquaintance. The girl pretended to agree. The maid went about her business and the girl waved at her, saying she would wait on the bench. But it would be said, Anissa decided to take a walk, at which point someone addressed someone in an insulting manner. Anissa looked out from behind a tree to see what was going on. Someone was punching Dietrich as he hit their leader, Alphonse. The boy was beaten by the knight, saying he was a fool who knew nothing because the demon had not shared his power with him. The man threw the boy against a tree, with Anissa watching from behind the tree. The knight spun some kind of key and said that this was to be worn for a few hours during training, but it certainly wasn't enough for Dietrich. He cuffed the boy's hands and left him in that position to sit under a tree and think about his behaviour. As soon as the man left, a girl came running up to the boy. He didn't understand how she was here. The girl didn't expect to see handcuffs on her brother's hands, but managed to tell him she was here with Marilyn. But there was also a seal that is usually used on prisoners with strong magical powers. The knight said that only by wearing this could Dietrich attend classes. The girl realized that her brother had been brazenly deceived. The boy bent down to retrieve his sword. The problem was that the man had taken the key with him and would not release it until tomorrow. The boy did not look at Anissa, and she concluded that her brother was ashamed the girl assured him that it was okay to be beaten by this strong and grown man, as Dietrich was still a child and should not be ashamed of the situation. Dietrich sighed. He said that a child can only be weak when he can be a child. At this point, the girl decided she should pat her brother on the head and began to do so. She was sure that when she mastered the sword, she would be able to defend her brother. A maid called out to Anissa, and Dietrich pushed her hand away. Marilyn ran up to the girl and hugged her, as she was very frightened that she was missing somewhere. The maid then looked at the boy and told him to be careful, as many children are lost at this time of year. The maid then looked at the boy and told him to be careful, because at this time of year, many children get lost. The boy decided to leave the two of them alone and went, saying that he was not so careless and reckless as to get lost. The maid begged his pardon for his impertinence. Anissa looked after him and pondered why and how he would become a villain. For real villains would never allow a mere servant to beat themselves. So Dietrich goes to a sword class once a week, but the problem is that after these classes he comes sealed up. Lo and behold, it happened now, and the boy was resting on the sofa in Castle Dahlia. Bale and Anissa were also in this room. Watching the resting boy, she asked the demon to remove the enchanted handcuffs from her brother. But he could not, as there were divine powers in this seal, which prevents him from removing them. The girl was upset because Bale was useless at this point. Dietrich opened his eyes and asked the girl not to take her anger out on the demon. The little girl genuinely wanted to free her brother for this. The boy needed the key, and Anissa realized the item was in the knight's possession. The boy looked at the girl and asked her to hide if she met the man anywhere. As he was one of Derek's confidants and Lady Leatrice's brother, this confirmed the girl's speculation that the knight had high patrons, which was why he was letting himself go too far. Now the problem was that Dietrich couldn't use his shadow powers, so it would be difficult for him to deal with the assassins who were sent to him every night. Besides, this was wearing Dietrich down too much. He was exhausted, and Anissa realized it was time to do something about it. So she decided to remember everything she knew about Leon. Maybe she could learn her weaknesses and use them against him. The girl knew that Leon's father was at odds with Duke Derek, so she thought she should use the Duke to her advantage. Bale also noticed that she looked like a witch instead of a sweet girl. At that moment, a few days passed. Merrill was absent, and Lancel brought food to the girl instead. He grumbled about how he was the one who took care of her since she was a baby, and she's all about Merrill. He felt hurt that for all his care the girl treated him so coldly. He felt betrayed, and also said that the maid had been called by someone and left. Leon came to see the girl, but she didn't seem to know him. The girl insisted that Lancel take her to them. The man carried her in his arms down the hallway and complained that she had deteriorated in character since the last time they had met. When they were in the garden, they heard Marilyn begging to be let go. The knight was pestering the maid to accept his marriage proposal because the girl was good enough for him, but she refused him not for the first time. Leon concluded that Marilyn wasn't seeing anyone. Anissa asked Lancel to bring her a little closer, but the knight didn't stop. He mentioned that the girl was already 30 years old, and she wasn't getting any younger, and with age and time a lot of things lose their appeal. Isa was angered by such statements. At this point the maid asked the man to stop coming to her, as she was no longer working in Lady Leatrice's house. Leon smiled strangely. He thought the girl needed to work for his sister again. Anissa listened attentively to the knight, who was already talking about Dietrich's lack of support, that he was the son of a slave and would never be a duke. The knight was sure that his family would choose the next duke, since Derek was currently obsessed with a woman, namely his sister, so he had nothing to fear and didn't take the maid's words seriously about keeping his mouth shut. He also showed the girl the key that was to Dietrich's bracelets, as well as the vault of the sealing stone, so the entire Lagrange family was in his family's hands. The man insisted that Marilyn marry him, and if she agreed, he wouldn't take more than 2 concubines. Anissa was beginning to lose her temper at the knight's insolence and impudence, but Lancel held her back for now. Leon left. Marilyn collapsed on the grass, and the girl stared intently at the colour of the villain's aura. It was the aura of a man who's excited and about to do something edible. It was a great chance for the girl to learn his weaknesses, so the man went to one of the walls and took out a single brick. It was a talking hole. The man behind the wall asked the knight if he had brought money. When he heard an affirmative answer, he had to answer Leon's question about the sealing stone. The girl knew that the Lagrange clan had a remarkable innate ability to make deals with demons, but some were not very good at controlling demons, so then they used the power of this stone. And then Anissa witnessed Leon selling this very stone to a stranger and rejoicing in the money he received when the deal was done. Leon walked away, and the girl was still hiding in the bushes watching his back. She knew it was what she needed, that weakness. Everyone in the Empire knew of the Lagrange family's notoriety, their hostility and cruelty. But one winter, they hold a special banquet to chase away the winter and the cold. Dietrich was going at it, at which point Anissa came up to him and asked to go there with him because she wanted to taste the Christmas pudding. The boy promised to bring it to her, but she didn't believe him and kept holding on to the edge of his clothes. The boy didn't want Derek to find out about her, so he didn't want to take her there. But Anissa wouldn't back down and said she was dressed pretty for the occasion. But the boy said there was nothing pretty about the girl, but Anissa pouted, and Dietrich relented, but asked her to stay with him. They arrived at the castle. It was much larger than the girl had imagined, and its decoration was magnificent, as were the people who came there. Everyone was greeted by Duke Derek with a glass of red wine. Dietrich and Anissa took their place at the table. The boy introduced the girl to her father. Derek was surprised that this child was not afraid of him, but smiled openly, the girl was noticed by the old man. He did not know that such a nice girl lived in this house. In general, the birth of girls in this family is rare. The old man also noted that today he felt good in this house, but in previous times he always felt sick. The woman next to him said the same thing, and Anissa praised herself for her decision to purify the space. When the girl got here, she saw that everyone's auras were shrouded in a thick fog, so she cleared the space and prepared for the second part of her plan. She noticed that Leon was looking nastily at his maid, who was standing behind her back, and in general he looked twice as old for the girl. The time had come. Derek was drinking his wine and making conversation with those who had come to his house, but the girl decided to play on his ego and pretend that she was more afraid of Leon than him, which would definitely get the Duke's attention. There was a commotion in the hall where the girl was shaking violently and had a change in her face. This caught Derek's attention, and he asked the little girl what was wrong. Anissa said nothing and only looked at Leon. This look was followed by the Duke and snorted at the knight. Derek asked the girl what frightened her about Leon. The man himself flinched under the Duke's gaze. And then Anissa started talking about how Leon said he was much scarier than the Duke. Derek was starting to boil. And the little girl continued. She explained that the other day, in the garden, Leon had threatened her maid, and then added that the knight claimed that the whole Lagrange family was in the hands of him and his relatives. The boy began to deny it. The girl did not stop. She told everyone that the knight had given the gem to someone unknown, and he gave him money for it. Derek looked at Leon and asked him if the child was talking about the most important stone. The knight denied it at this point. Leatrice took the floor and asked her brother to leave the banquet and not spoil the evening. The woman asked the Duke to punish Leon if she thought he was guilty, but only after the banquet. The man agreed. Derek ordered the knight to give him back the key to the vault and leave. After the banquet, Dietrich told his sister that she would sleep alone and in her room tonight. The girl realized that her brother was angry with her, but she didn't understand why. The boy yelled at his sister because he asked her to behave, and she made a show of it. But the little girl thought she had done the right thing, since Leon was a bad man who persecuted Marilyn and bullied Dietrich himself. The boy did not understand why his sister cared for the maid so much. He asked her to stop acting like that, because there are no good people in this house, and her care would get her in trouble in time. But the girl was of a different opinion. She thinks it's okay to sympathize with other people. Meanwhile, the boy went over to the fireplace and began to steal wood and coals, while his sister stood behind him and talked about how if he needed help, all he had to do was ask for it. Besides, she was sure that Marilyn was a very nice person, and Dietrich still didn't understand where his sister got that from. Dietrich went to bed, but he also told his sister that one day she would be hurt because of her naivete. But nevertheless, he took pity on the girl and invited her to sleep with him. And she was very glad this winter was coming to an end, and it was warm for the girl to sleep with her brother. Anissa was walking with Marilyn in the winter garden, and the girl was saying she wanted to be a warrior, though she realized she would probably become a mercenary if she was lucky, because she didn't want to forgive bad people like Leon. This was hilarious, but the maid realized that she was the one who had to protect the mistress, not her, but the girl objected, as Marilyn was very weak. Meanwhile, a man came into the garden and remarked that the girl was not like the other Lagrange children. Lord Joseph came into the garden. Anissa jumped up and bowed to him, even though she didn't really know who was standing in front of her. He introduced himself, calling himself Joseph Euclid, and allowing himself to be called grandfather, a situation that was as unconventional as possible. The little girl didn't believe he was Euclid, but it was true, but to them he was a traitor, and the head of the house of Euclid was his younger brother, to whom he had slit his throat and fled to Lagrange. Anissa realized that this bad man was her great-grandfather. The old man noticed that her eyes were red. He wondered if she was born or not. Marilyn also noted that the girl's eyes looked like two rubies, and the grandfather apologized for not looking at their color at the banquet, because he wondered if she was the savior of the North from the ancient legends, Grandpa continued. He said that the Lagrangians worshipped demons, the Euclids worshipped the sun god, and there were those who worshipped the prophet Erida. One of her prophecies said that a child with blue eyes could save the people of the North. The girl thought it was now about St. Charlotte, who would save Dietrich in the future, but she did not understand why the old man was looking for her among the Lagranges. Grandpa spoke in riddles. He thought Camille must have failed since the child was killed. And then she tensed up since it was possible that he realized who she really was. The girl pointed out to the old man that she didn't understand a word. He smiled and apologized for saying strange things. At that moment, he handed the girl a candy and asked if she liked stories, because he had the feeling that only next to her his thoughts were clearer, as if he had been to the temple of Erida. The girl took the candy. They smiled at each other, but the girl realized she had to be much more careful not to be discovered. But the little girl began to visit him, because she was interested in hearing stories about Eridi. The little girl thought that one was tough. That's why she came to her grandpa. She couldn't tell him the truth about her power. There was even a statue of Erida in his cabin, so she had the ability to affect people's feelings. She couldn't make anyone love her, but if someone was indifferent to her before, they could favor her. Joseph was also interested in Erida, but the girl didn't understand why he was here, because she wasn't worshipped in the north. The answer was unexpected. The old man was trying to create a demon using the powers of a sacred tree. He then suggested the girl look at the tree and went somewhere else. This tree could not grow by itself in the north, so he grew it in a pot like a house flower. It contained the power to suppress curses. The girl was holding a pot of wood and wanted to take it for herself. Surprisingly, Grandpa decided to give this specimen to her, since he had several others like it. He also explained that without Erida's powers, it would be impossible to grow a tree like this, but that keeping the finished specimen at home would give her no headaches. But Dietrich wouldn't be happy about it. The thing about the boy's demon Bale, whose power is incompatible with Erida's, here the girl realized why her brother's aura was almost impossible for her to read. The girl was walking home. She reflected that Dietrich was a closed person, but in time she was able to see his good side, which he hides and denies now the girl was sure that her brother would not become a villain in a few years. But then she saw a picture that she shouldn't have. Dietrich standing in the center, and the soldiers he had killed all around him. He didn't expect to see the girl here. The girl fell into the snow out of fear and surprise. The boy took her in his arms and carried her to the palace, for it was dangerous to be here late at night, and he was covered in blood. He carried her in his arms, and the girl noticed that the sun had not yet set over the horizon. But it did not matter to Dietrich, he promised his sister, to take her to her grandfather next time. 5 years had passed since that day, when Anissa was born and began to live with Dietrich in Castle Dahlia. This time, Dietrich came home covered in wounds and blood. The girl asked him what had happened, but all he did was chase her away. She had no idea what to do with wounds like that, and they must have been serious. The boy was shaking, and Anissa was just thinking about what she would do if he died. Not knowing what to do, Anissa ran to find Marilyn, who had many friends in Castle Vaughan. Maybe she knew how to heal her brother. The girl ran as fast as she could. She didn't know who could have hurt Dietrich so badly this time. In that second, she remembered under what circumstances the boy might have been wounded above the eye. It was Derek who was going to kill his son, at which point the girl crashed into Duke and fell to the floor. Anissa didn't understand what Derek was doing here, and then she realized he'd come here to kill his son. The man left the girl sitting on the floor, and himself went to his son's room. For now was the moment when the Duke was crazy about Leatrice, so he decided to help Alphonse. The likelihood of Dietrich standing up to her father was not as high as Anissa would have liked, so she didn't know whether to leave it alone or try to change the outcome. The girl realized she had to get to Dietrich before Derek did, so she called Bale. The demon moved her to her brother in a flash. She got straight to the point and asked Dietrich to run away from here as soon as possible. She shook him in fear and told him that their father was coming here. Meanwhile, the boy called Bale and asked him if he could defeat Derek, but the answer was no. So Anissa ran up to the demon, kicked him with her foot and asked him to protect her brother. The demon offered to use the girl as a go-between, but the boy was sure that wouldn't work, and asked for any other candidate to be brought here to make it harder for his father to kill him. This someone was Yurick. The boy fell to the floor, not having dropped the croissant from his hands. The boy did not understand what happened and why he was in Dietrich's room. Bale was already taking Anissa away, as the Duke was already on the threshold of the room. Doors open and Derek walks in. The girl watched through the window the events in the room, The Duke's bloodlust did not diminish in the presence of Yurick. Besides, he did not understand what he was doing here. Now the man paid attention to Dietrich. He noticed that he was wounded. He asked his son to take better care of himself, as he was one of the best candidates and also very talented. The girl was angry at the hypocrisy of the man. And then Derek asked Yurick to leave the room as he wanted to talk to Dietrich in private. Now she opened the window and held her hands out to them. She came into the room and demanded that those present play with her. She clung to Yurick, wouldn't let go of him, and demanded that he play with her. Even though he tried to tell her it wasn't the time, Anissa wouldn't let go of Yurick, no matter what he said, which made Derek even angrier, so the Duke picked up the girl and gazed at her, realizing she looked nothing like Camille. The man was pissed off that Camille hadn't recouped the money he had invested in her and hadn't borne him enough children, so he decided to sell Anissa into slavery when she was older, as she was already quite the adorable child now. But then he changed his mind, as he would be able to raise considerably more money now. To try and stop his father, Dietrich went to the trouble of saying that his sister had powers, but was too small to show them sufficiently. This news pleased the Duke, for he would get even more money, for it was common knowledge that slaves with abilities were worth their weight in gold, such as Dietrich's mother. Now it was the boy's turn, and he asked his father one question. Did he really want their family to face a wave of disgrace? After all, that's what is bound to happen if the Duke does that to his daughter, who has abilities and bears his surname. She is not a candidate for heir, but if she ends up as a slave in some house, it will not be good for their family's reputation as the ones who lead the North. The boy's words had an effect on the father, and he threw the little girl to the floor, then asked her name again, as he had apparently forgotten his own daughter's name. He repeated her name, went out the door, and told everyone to go to bed. The children stayed in Dietrich's room for the time being. As soon as the footsteps died down, Anissa rushed to hug her brother. The girl was trembling, so the boy decided to comfort her and stroke her head. Dietrich was a little surprised, for he had not noticed how caring for the girl had become a habit with him. The same girl was almost crying, looking at him with her big eyes and worrying about whether the boy was all right. At this very moment, the boy realized he had a very bad feeling. He looked into his sister's eyes and realized that everything had become too complicated and dangerous. Originally, this girl was not supposed to mean anything to him, but she had become very dear to him, and it was becoming more difficult to see her only as a victim to achieve his goal. A little time passed, and Anissa went back to the hole in the wall to see Yurick, who was not happy about it, as it was not safe for her to be on his family's castle grounds. So he jumped over the fence into the grounds of Castle Dahlia, the girl noticing his lightness and carelessness. He tried to correct his name as the girl was calling him wrong, but the attempt failed miserably, and the boy stood there asking her why she wanted to see him. She was worried about where Dietrich had gone, but Yurick didn't know Anissa was worried, because she couldn't find Bale either. So she thought her brother had gone to fight, so she asked Yurick for help, but he didn't know the answer to her question, and in general he and Dietrich were in different positions. Even though they both had the status of candidate heirs, Anissa was worried, because she couldn't find Bale either, so she thought that her brother had gone to fight, so she turned to Yurick for help, but he didn't know the answer to her question. And in general, Yurick had not yet decided whether he should fight for the place of the Duke. He realized that he was far inferior to his brothers, so he was down. Anissa, however, did not relent. She did not believe that the boy only had beautiful eyes. This statement made him very embarrassed, and he blushed. But to Anissa they were beautiful, his eyes, even if the boy didn't accept it yet. At that moment, Dietrich came into the garden and picked up his sister, reminding her that he had forbidden her to play with Yurick. Yurick came up to his brother and began to resent him. He did not like this attitude. Not only was he so unfriendly, but he had teleported him by force. Dietrich was in his repertoire and ignored his brother's question, pretending to swat away a fly that flew nearby. But then he deigned to reply, saying that even if he did it, what would Yurick do? Go complain. That offended the blue-eyed boy. To smooth things over and preserve Yurick's dignity, Anissa intervened, tugging at the hem of Dietrich's clothes and asking where he had been. The girl looked at him, but her brother's aura was the same as always, grey with fog. Yes, she knew now that it could have been influenced by Baal's power, but he was always calm and poised, so it was easy enough for her to tell what he was thinking. Now the boy turned his attention to her and said that he had heard that she was looking for him. Then he dropped her hand and mouthed that she should learn to take care of herself from now on, since she wasn't really little, so she shouldn't bother him so often. Saying that, he just walked away. This made Anissa angry, for she thought that since she was 5 years old she was still a child, and Dietrich was obliged to take care of her and help her. And besides, she treated him perfectly well. Even though she had made up her mind to pursue her brother, Bale wouldn't give up. And no matter how hard she tried to find out where Dietrich was, he wouldn't talk. So she hadn't seen him in days. But the girl kept pestering the demon with questions and requests. The girl was walking down the hallway, steam coming out of her ears, as Bale was now starting to correct her pronunciation as well. This added fuel to her bad mood, as she thought she spoke well for a 5-year-old. In a fit of anger, the girl made a mistake and climbed through the hole without making sure it was safe to do so. So now she was grabbed by a tall guy who looked something like Yurick guy looked at her, insulted her and threw her on the grass. The little girl fell on the grass and hit herself, and the guy kept saying mean things. Anissa realized it was Alphonse. He was looking at her face, saying she was pretty, even though she didn't have much ability. She started to lash out because she didn't come here to see him. She came here to see his little brother. This answer did not please the young man, and he pushed her painfully, asking her why she should visit his brother. But the girl did not answer, so Alphonse decided to act differently. He grabbed her, lifted her up, and said that he had heard that Dietrich always comes running when someone hurts her. Anissa wanted to break free, but could not, so she bit Alphonse's finger. Yes, he let her go, or rather threw her to the ground, but promised her terrible torments for this act. Indeed, the girl made things worse. The guy decided to teach her some manners, namely kicking her. The girl didn't know what to do, and called Dietrich. Then a pillar of light appeared and threw Alphonse away from the victim. The man who appeared and protected the girl had a grey-green aura, not like Baal's. The boy stood in front of her with Amon Amon is Eureka's demon. The boy gently lifted her from the ground and asked her why she had come here, for he had told her 100 times that it was not safe for her to walk here, but she was more concerned with how he had managed to make such a contract with the demon. She admitted that she missed her brother, which is why she came to see him, but then poked her finger at the demon and asked what it was. Yurick explained that it was now his demon which Dietrich had given him, and that was interesting and questionable, since she wanted a demon too, but her brother wouldn't let her. But Yurick said it doesn't work that way, because to control a demon you need power. If the master doesn't have that power, it's easy to kill him and take the demon for yourself. So those who make contracts like that don't live long. Anissa almost cried. She didn't understand her brother's choice, but Yurick sat down and stroked her head. But it wasn't much consolation, because the boy said everyone would die one way or another. The boy smiled at her, but she didn't understand how she could be a child in this cruel world. Yurick smiled. Now he understood why Dietrich kept the girl close to him, for she was so problematic to protect. But then the boy wondered if his brother had another reason for doing so. The boy added that thanks to this demon, none of Leatrice's children dared to harm her. But suddenly the little girl looked at the boy and asked who could protect Dietrich now. Besides, the girl always wondered. Charlotte was protected by Dietrich and Hermann in the book, but the Empire was always on Hermann's side. Meanwhile, in the garden, Dietrich was looking up into the sky, where a demon, ridden by a man, was flying. It was Veronique, the candidate heir adopted by the Lagrange family and raised by Leatrice. The girl leaned over to Dietrich and said that his little sister was now wondering who and how she could protect her little brother. The boy answered her threateningly not to dare to put her hands on his sister, but this did not impress Veronica, as he was not yet officially recognized as the heir. Dietrich had no desire to continue this conversation and sent the girl away, but since she was in no hurry to leave, the boy decided to leave, saying that none of Leatrice's children had ever learned to bark. Veronica couldn't believe that this boy cared about anyone, and then began beating Alphonse, who was lying on the ground, screaming that it was a gesture of betrayal to him and his mother. The girl was annoyed by the guy's logic because he thought that if he was his mother's favourite son, no one could touch him, but he was wrong. She pressed her foot harder on his chest, telling him that he couldn't be the heir. Even with Derek's help, she smiled, because weaklings can't lead this family. Nevertheless, she let go of Alphonse and walked away, and the boy was left lying on the ground, unable to move, and now Veronica was going to visit Anissa. The girl was just walking in the garden and received a gift of bread from Yurick. But Veronica couldn't believe that this child was Dietrich's sister. The girl didn't understand what was special about the little girl, watching her from behind the tree, but she seemed to notice her. So the girl ran to her, hoping that it was Bale. But Veronica found this interesting because the child should not have seen her in the shadows. When the child ran up, she sniffed the space like a dog and realized that it was not Bale. At that moment, Veronica came out of the shadows and frightened the girl. After, introduced herself. Anissa looked at the girl with all her eyes, for she was beautiful, not ugly, for she had thought she would be just like that since she had managed Marilyn a few years ago. The girl went on to say in admiration that Veronica smelled like the moon from a children's story. It said that Luna smelled like sad grass. Veronica objected, because she smelled like roses. Anissa lowered her head and said she didn't smell roses, but the scent of sadness did, and then handed the girl the fresh and soft croissant that Yurick had brought her. The little girl thought she should eat something tasty when she was sad to make herself feel better. Here the girl had a dilemma. She could not give all the bread to Veronica, as such food was rare in the Georgina household, but she wanted to help the girl. But she stood silent for the time being and did not take the croissant. Veronica proudly said she didn't like bread, so Anissa decided to eat it all herself, since Dietrich wasn't around and the girl refused. And only stupid people offer twice. Veronica meanwhile turned around and went home. Anissa didn't think she would ever meet Veronica, but she was wrong. When she was walking with Yurick, a girl approached them. Yurick jumped up and covered the little girl with himself, protecting her from her half-sister. The girl didn't understand why Yurick was acting like that with her sister, but he claimed they weren't blood relatives. But Anissa was friendly to the girl and waved to her in a friendly manner, but Yurick did not believe his sister and thought that she had come to Castle Georgina to harm the girl while Dietrich was away. Veronica partially agreed with the boy. She didn't know why she had come here. Meanwhile, Anissa came up to her, took her hand, and asked if she wanted to eat bread with them. The little girl began to hug Veronica. She saw her aura, which was very warm and light. Yurick tried to pull the girl away from her half-sister, because he thought she was dangerous, but he did not succeed. The boy claimed that Veronica had killed her own family to get into their house. Veronica reacted instantly. Her aura changed colour. Her demon appeared, threw Yurick to a tree, and the girl still hugged Veronica. Yurick responded by summoning Aemon demons, began to fight. Little girl knew this could end badly, so she clenched her fist to stop it all. Anissa stood between the demons and asked them to stop this outrage. The demons fell silent, their masters stood in utter shock, and Anissa told them not to come here without bread now. Anissa decided that guests should bring food to their castle, especially if they wanted to fight here. At that moment, Veronica rushed over with macaroons and asked if the girl had eaten something like that. The girl had never tasted something like that, but she really wanted to. The girl cried from pleasure. She had only seen such deliciousness in pictures, and now she was lucky enough to try it. Veronica did not understand her reaction. Veronica sat down next to the girl and grumbled that Dietrich must not have fed the baby. Then Yurick appeared in the garden and brought some kind of bag. He ran up to the girl and started shaking her, forcing her to spit out the macaroon because he thought it was poisoned. She hadn't seen Bale in a few days, so she decided to practice her sword skills on her own. She needed that skill to protect Dietrich and escape from the castle, and she needed to know how to defend herself. Anissa pondered if she would help trust Dietrich and tell him the truth about her power and how he would behave with her after the confession in the garden. The girl looked at the tree Joseph had given her. It wasn't growing at all, so she wondered if she would be able to sign a contract with the shadow demon. And then there was a macaron under the tree, on a beautiful handkerchief, calling the girl to him. Besides the macaron, there was a little farther away a long custard bread, and farther away a chocolate eclair, followed by a donut, and then the girl realized it was probably a trap. Anissa crawled through the garden and collected baked goods, No hostile aura she sensed from the objects. There was a chocolate fountain waiting for her at the end of the path. Veronica had prepared it all for her, but she tried to deny it, saying that she had prepared it for someone else, but since the girl was here, she could eat it all. Then Veronica went over to the fountain and dipped a croissant in it, although etiquette dictated that it be done with a knife. Baby holding candy and looking insanely happy, Veronica called her silly and fed her a croissant. Anissa had her first ever binge on good food, that is candy. The last thing on the table was pudding. The girl didn't understand why the girl was giving it to her. She realized that Veronica probably wanted something in return, but she didn't say what it was yet. Veronica admitted that at first she wanted to poison all the candy, but she didn't want to mess with Dietrich, at least not right now. The girl noted that there was no use in killing the girl at all, since she didn't even have a demon to steal, and she reminded the girl of a child she had known for a long time. Anissa was confident that Veronica would not poison her, for her aura is always warm and bright. And actually Anissa just really liked Veronica, which surprised the girl a lot, and afterwards there was a provocation. The girl asked the little girl if she loved her more than Dietrich. Anissa answered that she did, not knowing that her brother was behind her back. The boy came to the table and didn't understand why he couldn't even eat in peace. His little sister was surprised to see her brother so unexpectedly so. Now she grabbed his sleeve and told him she loved him more than anyone else in the world, but the boy pulled his hand away and said he didn't care. He ignored his sister and turned to Veronica. He reminded the girl that he had not allowed her to come to Castle Dahlia. The girl said she wasn't going to hurt his sister and decided to clean up the garden right now. A bunch of little shadows were carrying away the table, chairs, and most importantly the chocolate fountain, Anissa shouted after them. Veronica didn't understand why the girl was so upset, since she could eat something like this every day, but that wasn't the case. Since Georgina Palace is poor, Veronica cheered up the girl, saying that Dietrich's rank was high now, so they didn't have to worry about money anymore. She wiped her face with a handkerchief, but the boy turned out to have refused Derek's protectorate, so everything remained in place. Veronica offered to help. Anissa accepted, but Dietrich refused. Veronica did not understand the reason for the refusal. There was dead silence in the clearing after Dietrich's answer, saying that sweets ruin your teeth. Veronica went to her room, and Anissa felt embarrassed by the situation, so the little girl decided to change the situation and wanted to take and show her brother something interesting. But the boy turned around and walked away too. The girl looked at his back and didn't understand what had happened to him, because before she had always tried to act without contradicting her feelings. At night, Anissa decided to follow her brother. She caught up with him with a lantern and asked him if he had eaten well or not. The boy said he had. The girl grabbed his sleeve and stopped him. She thought he was walking strangely. Had he really been hurt again? The boy said he twisted his leg in the afternoon when he was dealing with the killers in the afternoon. Even Derek noticed all this and said he was glad his son had survived. He was pleased that the boy was resilient and stubborn, then asked how Anissa was doing. He was glad that Dietrich cared for the girl. It would give him a weakness, so the boy asked his sister to be careful. The girl did not understand her brother's mood, and he recalled his father's words, who compared him to an autumn leaf. But the girl didn't back down and asked him if his leg was hurting badly. The boy didn't like that she was the only one who knew about his pain, so he pulled his arm out. He asked his sister not to follow him, as she had no idea what he would do to her in the future. But Anissa blocked his passage and asked him to drink the medicine first. Dietrich didn't understand the nature of her excitement, and the girl said it was simple. She cared about him because he was nice, but the boy said she didn't understand or know anything, so he pushed her aside and went his own way. The next day, the little girl went to Joseph's house to visit. She saw Grandpa packing his sack with various things. She realized that he was going on a trip, but she wanted to know where. But he was in no hurry to tell her, but he did remark that she was too different from the Lagrangians. Anissa put her head up to be stroked, for she understood humans well and knew that Grandpa would miss her. He decided to go to the forest, which was in neutral territory. He wasn't bored with demons, but there was going to be a war soon, the War of the Roses. Joseph invited her to come with him because he realized that she had no special abilities, so Dietrich could survive, but she was unlikely to. Grandpa said Derek couldn't hurt her there. The girl knew that none of the children could leave this place until the heir to the lineage was named. Anissa worried that Joseph might be in trouble, but he said it wouldn't be so easy for Derek to kill him and get him, and the little girl claimed she'd be okay too, because she had Dietrich in the novella. Anissa became Dietrich's weapon in this war. She followed Hermann Euclid's movements. The girl realized that she was doing well, as long as Dietrich was on her side. She also knew that one day she would leave this house. But not now. Unfortunately, the boy didn't have any adults to protect him. Only Anissa was on his side. Realizing this, Grandpa decided that he couldn't leave without leaving anything for the girl. Grandpa understood that they were family. The man had no choice but to agree with that, so he gave the girl an opal and asked her to carry it with her. The little girl wanted to sell it for money, but Grandpa wouldn't let her because it was an ability booster. The girl hid it in her pocket. The man finished talking and asked for someone to appear. Dietrich appeared in the room. The boy picked up the girl and reminded her that he had asked her not to walk alone in such places unnecessarily. This situation embarrassed the girl. When the boy took her in his arms, he smiled, and the girl noticed and hugged her brother. Grandpa also noticed that the boy was smiling at him for the first time in his life. The girl cuddled up to the boy and thought that he wasn't bad enough to use her. Anissa knew that even if she said she would not leave Dietrich, he could hardly understand and feel love. Yurick had déjà vu. Anissa came through the hole in the wall and waved at him. She asked the boy to play with her in the castle walls, as Dietrich ignored her request. Everyone knew that children who weren't candidates couldn't leave the castle, so Yurick wondered. The boy pondered that she needed to buy something in town, and the girl didn't understand why there was so much discrimination here. The girl was interested in how much money Yurick had. He said not much. After that, the girl called him useless, but then the boy clarified her desire to get outside. At this point, she grabbed the boy's hand and began to praise him, and he was already shaking a bag of money in front of her. Anissa thought Yurick was going to give her the money, but it turned out he just wanted to show it to her. The boy and the girl went to town without telling Dietrich, for there was something she wanted to buy. The girl did not say anything to her brother because he was very busy, and Yupik was a little offended because he was not idle either. To calm him down a little, the girl gave him a lot of compliments. The boy was embarrassed. He knew you couldn't call his eye colour beautiful in the north, but he decided to scare the little girl into not taking her with him. But she knew that wasn't true, and so they arrived on the scene. Yurick showed his pass to the guards on the way in, and they went on their way. No one even asked who she was, as there are many children her age in the Lagrange family. There were a lot of people in the city, and the girl was very excited when she saw them all. It was a real world where people lived. They came to the fountain. Yurick didn't understand why the girl liked it so much, because in their garden the fountain was much prettier than here. They were walking further down a city street, and the boy thought that she should have been brought here much earlier. Anissa realized that all her actions had changed Yurick, and most likely not just him, and were not meaningless. They went into a shop, and Yurick found a nice knife. The boy was delighted. He had wanted to buy this item for a long time because it was black and covered in dark magic, and also if blood got on it, it wouldn't stain. Essentially, this knife absorbed blood. But if the blood dried up, you would have to make an effort to scrape it off. And the boy was already dreaming of teaching Anissa how to slit someone's throat without getting blood on his face. He bought a knife, and now on the street he was showing the girl a mini scene where the throat and the heart were, but the girl wanted to change the story and run away. But he was interrupted by Anissa. She saw Yurick's sister and told him about it. Veronica was walking on this street in town. A boy and a girl followed her and saw someone asking her to spare him. She was excellent with the knife and whip, so the girl stood on the man, who begged her for mercy, for he was wrong. The girl did not deny that he was wrong, so she punished him. Turns out it was her uncle who told Derek she could see shadows she now knew, as did many in the north, if not all, that the Lagrangians wanted a monopoly on demons. She was strangling a man already since her mum didn't want to put her in that damn family. Veronica's whole family had died because of this man. She wondered what her uncle had gotten for betraying his sister. The girl towered over the man who was lying on the ground, and a shadow began to appear beside her. Anissa watched the changes in the girl's aura and noticed that she became very sad and ran to her. Veronica didn't expect to see her here, especially at this moment, so she was very nervous, and her smile was strained. She tried to explain what had happened here. Veronica realized that the girl had seen everything, so she decided she didn't need to justify herself. She said that the girl was wrong when she said she was like the moon because she tortured people when she couldn't control her anger. But Anissa said Veronica looked like the moon not because of her kindness, but because of her beauty. Veronica was worried about whether the girl was afraid of her or not. Anissa wasn't afraid, and the girl was talking about how she had just killed a man, and the little girl was saying she wasn't afraid of her. It was a little weird, but Anissa reminded her that Veronica had punished the bad uncle. The girl hugged Veronica and said that she was not afraid of her, and in general, she thought that the girl had done the right thing, because this man was hard to call a person because he had sold Veronica and caused the death of her mother. Anissa said it's okay to be angry. Good people do it, not just bad ones. Veronica thanked the girl for that and for the hug. Yurick was already heading towards them. No one was paying attention to the boy, and Veronica was already asking what the girl was doing here, because Dietrich was in charge of the neighborhood. Anissa was already sitting in the girl's arms and saying she needed lottery tickets, but Yurick objected because the girl wanted to do it with him. Veronica was carrying her in her arms. They had to go to the casino to get them, and the boy looked after them and resented them. The girl said it was all force of habit. The boy almost cried, and didn't understand why Anissa was on his half-sister's side. But the little girl held out her hand to him and asked him to come with them. The boy thought they didn't need him anymore, so he took offense, but the girl assured him otherwise. The three of them walked on. So they came to a place that should have been a casino, but the man at the entrance didn't want to let them in. The guard wouldn't let them in because the place was off limits to children. And then the girl introduced herself and asked the man if he really wanted to get in her way. The girl's name did the trick. So they went inside and found the lottery ticket place. The curtain opened and a man appeared. He asked Anissa if she wanted to buy a ticket. She said yes, but the ticket cost 2 coppers. But Yurick only had 1. It turned out that the boy had spent almost all of his money on the knife, so he was pretty much broke now. But the little girl was determined and went to the cash register window. The girl handed 1 copper to the cashier, who didn't understand what was going on, because the price of a ticket is 2 coppers, not 1. But the girl asked him for a discount because she had no money at all. But Anissa looked at him with all her eyes, sweetly, so it was very difficult for the man to refuse her. And then he gave up and the girl got a ticket. The little girl was excited because she could buy Veronica something delicious if she won. After the girl said that, Veronica went to the cash register and bought all the lottery tickets. Yurick and Anissa couldn't believe what they saw. As the girl was very generous and rich, the man brought all the tickets, but Veronica asked him to bring a bag for them as well. The guy packed up all the tickets and gave them to the girl. The girl asked him to keep the change. Anissa and Yurick were mesmerized by such a gesture of his sister. Veronica gave all the tickets to the girl for Anissa. It was the perfect chance to get what she wanted. Yurick was sad that the girl was paying more attention to his sister, and he said he usually had more money than he did today too, and the girls had already gone to look around the casino. Anissa saw a ball and cup game and decided to try to play it. The game was already being played by 2 kids who apparently worked at the casino. The man rotated the cups and asked him to choose one. The child pointed to the middle one. The man led him off the right path. His aura also changed colour. Anissa was watching. She was behind the boy's back, telling him to choose the left cup. Anissa called herself a genius and waited for the result, and that was the correct answer. Then one of the girls playing introduced herself. It turned out to be Charlotte. She was the only protagonist in the original book. Anissa didn't believe in coincidences, and the combination of silver hair and brown eyes was rare. This girl was a commoner, but had an incredibly large amount of divine powers in the book. Dietrich spent half his family's treasure to get her the rank of noblewoman. In the book, Charlotte was a very humble person, but the little girl didn't expect to meet her so soon. The girls started talking. As it turned out, Anissa was here for the first time, so Charlotte hadn't met her until now. As it turned out, the girl apparently hadn't met Dietrich since she wasn't from around here either. Charlotte came to town because of the prophecy. Determined to check it out, this information intrigued Anissa. The girl promised to tell her about it if Anissa won the game. Anissa took the bait and went to play and effortlessly found the ball, and so on several times in a row. Erida's abilities could be considered cheating, but the game's host was the first to cheat. Now the man was raising the stakes and asking the girl to play one more time. This time Anissa couldn't answer, because the host's aura wasn't connected to any of the glasses on the table. Anissa realized that this guy could hardly control his aura like Dietrich, so she decided to look under the table. Her action made the man sweat and frightened. Then the girl gave her answer. The balloon was under the tablecloth. The man didn't realize who he was messing with, and that girl always gets what she wants. So she didn't look at his objections, lifted up the tablecloth, and there lay the balloon. After winning, the girl demanded her money, but he was in no hurry to give her the money and accused the girl of foul play. But at that moment, the other children who had lost to him started demanding that he give them their money back. And then the man became enraged, grabbed Anissa, threatened her, and accused her of being responsible for everything going wrong. Anissa proved that she wasn't cheating and looked around for Veronica and Yurick, but they were nowhere to be seen. At that moment, another participant came into the casino. A demonic snake crawled into the casino, pushed the crook away and put the girl on its back, then put her on the floor. Then the girl realized who the demon belonged to. She turned around and saw Dietrich. The boy ordered his sister to step aside. She did not resist and looked at the snake, Basilisk. Dietrich approached the man, who still did not realize who was in front of him, and the girl also began to worry, as her brother's aura became bright red. The boy introduced himself. He was also the ruler of this city, and informed the crook that the girl he had just offended was his little sister. Dietrich continued. He accused the man of involving children in gambling, as well as assault, including assaulting a child of noble blood. The boy insisted that under all circumstances the man was to blame, while Anissa, meanwhile, cuddled with a snake. Then the boy grabbed his sister's hand and dragged her behind him. There he saw Yurick and demanded an explanation. The boy was tied by shadows to something and asked his brother to release him, but he demanded an explanation first. But Dietrich wanted an answer, and Dietrich wanted to show Yurick who he shouldn't bark at. Both boys' auras were ablaze with anger, and Anissa didn't understand how to put out that fire. Nevertheless, Yurick replied that Anissa wanted to go out on the town, and he had some shopping to do. Dietrich wouldn't let it go. He didn't understand how he could fail with just one errand, and it was his job to protect the girl, which he essentially did. Dietrich was angry because he felt that Yurick had been negligent in his duties and had not paid attention to the girl's amusement when the boy wanted to harm his brother. Yurick was covered by Anissa. The girl disobeyed her brother and said that it was her fault, and if he wanted to punish someone, it should be her and not Yurick. Dietrich calmed her down and said that it would be her turn. The girl explained that she really needed a lottery ticket. All because their castle can't afford candy. Dietrich claimed he didn't need sweets or other food, but Anissa knew that wasn't true, and they're poor. The boy couldn't stand it. He didn't understand where his sister got that from. She said it was what the other kids said. Veronica appeared at this point and said, putting her arm around Dietrich, that her father had stopped sponsoring them to keep them in line. Anissa wondered where Veronica had been all this time. But Dietrich had already said that lottery tickets were nothing. Veronica bragged that she had bought tickets for 3 bois. The girl noticed the wrinkles on the boy's face and apologized for not following Anissa. She needed to deal with her mother's spies because she was helping Dietrich in exchange for the demon, so it was a big secret. Then he threw her arm off his shoulder and went to the exit, and the girl said to him that he was a little rascal. Anissa ran after him because she wanted to go home together. But standing in her way was Charlotte, who condemned the girl's family, even as a saint who would eventually save her brother. Anissa didn't realize that it was now a crime to be a child, even if it was in such a horrible family. But Charlotte cared that the little girl didn't look bad. Turns out the saint had a similar ability to Anissa. She could tell the difference between good and bad people. In other words, if Anissa read people's auras, Charlotte read their hearts. But then the saint decided to keep her promise and tell of the prophecy. The gist of it was that if the blue-eyed girl became the North's bride, he would be saved. It wasn't exactly a secret, because the temples of Erida were full of rumours about it. But people with blue eyes are rare in the North, Anissa sighed. But there were no temples nearby. So Charlotte thought it was the first time the girl had heard of this prophecy, and now it was time for the saint to go home too. Charlotte thought that this prophecy was one of falsehood, and didn't yet know that she was intimately connected to it herself. She had to use divine powers to do it, and then her eyes would turn blue. There was also a prophecy in the book, and Charlotte became Dietrich's bride, hence the North. But it didn't help Dietrich. He was sealed, and his family fell in the book. Charlotte and Dietrich were linked by fate, but the girl at the time thought it was just a plotline and twist. And then the girl realized that the prophecy was real, but the problem was in its interpretation. Charlotte was already leaving the casino, Anissa sighed, because she shouldn't have invented the wheel. Everything was going the way it should, according to the plot of the book. Anissa and Dietrich were walking home. The boy was clearly still angry with his sister and walked ahead, ignoring her. He was waiting for her at the entrance to the casino and now pretended they were not together. The girl admitted that she had a lot of fun today. She told her brother that she bought a lot of tickets and lunged at a game of Find the Ball. She grabbed her brother's hand as she missed him a lot, and they had been talking for a long time too. The boy agreed, the boy objected. He said he saw her a couple days ago. But Anissa claimed he wasn't playing with her then. The girl purposely mangled her words, and this caused her brother to smile, but also to remark that she had never learned to speak properly. The girl promised him that if she got the money for the lottery ticket, she would buy lots of goodies and feed them to him, but he told her not to do such a thing. At that moment, they were passing a toy store, and in the window the girl saw a cute raccoon, but it cost a fortune, 50 silver coins. The boy realized his sister wanted this toy, even though she said otherwise. The girl said their palace was poor, but the boy clenched his fist and told her to get ready. He broke the window and got her a raccoon. He asked his sister to accept a stolen gift. Dietrich held the toy with one hand. The other was wounded and bleeding for the girl to take the toy. He said he would throw it away if she didn't need it. Anissa took the raccoon from her brother, thanked him, but didn't understand what he was doing or why he was doing it. Afterwards, he looked at his sister and asked her to remember that for their family members, money was not a problem. At which point, the shopkeeper appeared. The man shouted at them and asked them what they had done here. He questioned them about who they were and why they had broken a window in his store. Dietrich took Derek's seal out of his pocket and said that it was the Duke who would reimburse him for his losses. And Anissa did not understand where her brother had gotten his father's seal. The boy and girl were leaving, but Dietrich said the man could demand double payment from his father, and the boy stole the seal from Derek. The boy wanted to save it for last, but he had to use it now, because Anissa had already told him it was wrong to steal. Dietrich noted that only Southerners could say that, and the girl knew she was really from the South. A new day had dawned. Anissa sat at the dining room table, Marilyn serving her food and telling her that Lancel had not been seen for a long time. The maid immediately started making excuses, saying it wasn't because she was having trouble looking after the girl on her own. The maid thought that workers like the young man would be more suited to Lady Leatrice. Anissa began to eat, angry that the boy was getting a full paycheck for doing nothing. She finished her meal and ran away from the table. The girl decided to find Lancel, piss him off, and then clean his aura. That's a workout. Suddenly, she felt someone's presence. It was Bale, who was following her. It was Dietrich's order, so there was nothing to be done about it, and the girl realized that her training might fail. Bale was even a little offended as he took a bath today, because the girl kept calling him a stinker, and he didn't like it. The girl turned around and walked away, and the demon said he was going to hide so he wouldn't stink her up. So Anissa found Lancel in the garden. In the gazebo where he was sleeping sweetly, the smell of his aura was strange, a little grumpy and insignificant. The man woke up and the girl was about to cleanse his aura, and he thought she wanted to break the rose on his jacket lapel. Now the girl was getting angry, as it was obvious that he took her for a disgusting person. But then the flower broke. It was a plaster rose that broke when it was cleaned, though the girl didn't even touch it. Anissa realized it was magic or a curse and tried to remember what Joseph had told her about it, but she was brought out of her thoughts by Lancel's voice asking if she was hurt or not. The young man changed and began to show concern, noticing the cut on her arm. He picked her up in his arms and carried her to the castle. He ran straight for Marilyn's help. The girl looked up at him and said she was fine. Then suddenly Lancel fell to his knees and started shaking. He was going through a strange change. Now he looked at her and said she was very pretty. He couldn't get enough of the girl, and she thought he was crazy. He sat her down on the edge of the fountain and asked her to wait for him here, because he had to make sure her arm wasn't scarred. Not only did the man's behavior change, but also the color of his aura. Previously, no matter how much she cleaned it, it remained dark blue, but now it was a completely different color. The girl didn't understand what had happened. Anissa realized that the rose was cursed, but that meant that many other items could be so as well. She tuned into their frequency and determined that there were 3 of these things. Meanwhile, Anissa didn't wait for Lancel, but snuck into Leatrice's garden, climbed up on the fountain statue, and tried to get one of her eyes. She didn't understand why the demonic thing had been placed here. The little girl reached the eye of the statue and began to clean it. The stone crumbled. That meant she had succeeded. She climbed down from the fountain and remembered that the first duke could control people with his demon. It is because of Asmodeus, the demon of the first duke, that children here are taught to kill rather than love. Anissa realized that the children of this house could hardly be called angels, and their auras could be dark due to their bad deeds. It just so happens that these kids think it's okay to torture their family members, but it's the only way for them to survive in this house. It was clear that Dietrich from the book and now were 2 different people, and the fact that they were all born into this family doesn't make them definite villains, because they were originally just normal kids. The girl thought about what would happen if she destroyed all the cursed objects. She made the decision not to back down and went to the castle. Anissa snuck into the castle itself. It was very beautiful and rich inside. The last item was in this castle. Dark energy was coming from right from behind the door that was across from where the little girl was standing. The girl decided to go into the room, as by the aura there was only a baby in there. Anissa thought Lady Leatrice must have at least 5 nannies, but the baby was crying and no one was coming to her. There was a baby in the cradle, crying and ranked higher than the girl. This girl was very cute, and in fact born with a silver spoon in her mouth. The aura was very strong on top of that. The girl reached out for one of the toys whose aura was about to turn a dark colour. Due to the curse, she grabbed it, and then someone distracted her. Anissa realized that someone was coming into the room. She floundered, because she didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to hide. Leatrice came into the room. She went to the cradle, looked at the baby, and concluded that she was hungry. Anissa was hiding under the cradle. The girl wouldn't stop crying. The lady took her in her arms, but admitted that she didn't like infants because they cry all the time. The woman asked that the baby not cry, and she didn't want to become attached to it, as she knew that as soon as she did, the baby would disappear. And then Anissa sneezed. She realized it was a mission failure. The lady looked in the direction where the girl was hiding and said that she had never learned to hide, which even weak animals could understand. She walked over to her and said she should have at least hidden her legs. Leatrice smirked and reached under the covers to retrieve the girl. She was surprised that she was holding a bird in her hand. The lady demanded answers from Anissa, though she was patient, but not that patient, and the girl realized at that moment how all of Dietrich's victims felt. Anissa tried to make it sound like it was no big deal, but Leatrice looked at the crib and realized that's where it came from. She then lay down on the floor to look at the girl and called her a thief. The girl realized it was crazy scary. Then the woman got up and asked the girl to get out of there, because her neck was stiff in that position. The little girl crawled out of her hiding place, and the woman felt something strange. Namely, the lady stopped having a headache and asked the girl if it was her ability or a coincidence Anissa was studying the woman's aura. She saw burns on it, so she doubted she could clear it, so she assumed she was the one who cast the Asmodeus curses, and then Leatrice broke the toy. The woman said that Derek had gotten this from the first duke, so she wondered why Anissa had taken it and broken it. She couldn't tell the truth, so she kept quiet. But then she felt Bale appear. For some reason, Leatrice thought Anissa was going to hurt her since she was home alone, but the kids were supposed to be back any minute. Now Anissa realized why the palace was so empty. And yes, she didn't want to go out with Alphonse, so she looked innocently at the woman and asked what she could do to be let home. But the woman insisted on an explanation, at which point Yurick burst into the room. He was sweating and covered in abrasions. The mother would not let her son down for being rude and admonished him that it was uncivilized to barge into other people's rooms without knocking. The boy said he saw Dietrich's sister in the window and came running in, and the girl was surprised that the woman did not pay attention to her son's wounds. Yurick, however, looked only at Anissa and with one lip said he would save her. The woman again said it was all very strange. The woman no longer found her son's eyes repulsive. The girl didn't understand this lady at all, and Yurick only nodded at that. Anissa suddenly realized that Leatrice had never liked her son's eyes and had spoken openly about it. Now the focus of her attention was on the girl. She wanted to know what business the little girl had with her. While Anissa was thinking about what to say, mother and son started a conversation. The boy said that after he gave up his title, he had begun to serve Alphonse, so he could not even tell his mother the nature of his master's assignment. The lady warned her son that if he lied to her, he would be punished severely. The woman left the room, and the children breathed a sigh of relief. Now Bale had taken on his appearance and asked the girl why she had come here. She said she had important things to do. The boy stood looking at the door where his mother had gone and was puzzled. He did not understand why his mother said that she no longer found his eyes disgusting, for before it had been different. Before, they hadn't even looked at each other, but this time she was looking right at him, and Anissa realized that since Leatrice's demeanor had changed, the things she had broken were really cursed. At that moment, the boy grabbed his arm. Anissa ran up to him and realized that he had been beaten, that he had lied about Alphonse, and that his mother was about to find out the truth. The girl had no idea how to save her friend from the next beating that awaited him as punishment. At that moment, Yurick couldn't think of anything better than a lie, so when things come to a head, Anissa better not come here for a while. But the girl didn't want to play this game, and was thinking of a way out of this situation, namely, to protect Yurick and the other children. Because of the curse, the other children are cruel to Yurick, but if you destroy the things that affect them, then maybe they'll change their attitudes, like Lancel and Leatrice. As soon as Anissa thought of it, she ordered Bale to carry her to the rose yard. Besides, Dietrich wasn't supposed to know about it. This palace was the home of one of Derek's wives. There was little information about it in the novel, but the girl had already taken her first steps on the grass. In other words, this castle was for show in the book. Now the girl and the demon were going on an adventure. Bale offered to go home before it was too late, but the girl smelled something and wouldn't listen to him. Anissa realized that Dietrich would probably be angry, but she was doing her best for him. At this point, the girl ran forward through the park, and the demon decided to follow her in the shadows. Anissa ran up to a tree, that scent changing its location, as the cursed was a piece of jewelry on a person's body. Anissa witnessed 3 children playing, or rather fighting and arguing over which of them would be the heir candidate, all with the same jewelry around their necks. And then the children noticed Anissa and went in her direction, asking who she was and where she was from. The girl didn't know what to say. The kids demanded answers and held up their knives, and then it occurred to her to call herself a shadow demon. The kids believed it and were absolutely delighted. As the girl got closer to them, she realized that their pendants were cursed. All 3 wanted to make a contract with her if she didn't have a master. They were too noisy, so Anissa got in over her head and said she didn't need a master because she's a lone demon. The guys didn't understand what was going on, thought maybe it was the poison, but they tried all kinds. At this point, Anissa suggested they play a game, but they didn't realize what could be more exciting than kill your brother. The girl convinced them that it was more exciting and worth putting their necklaces on the line. So the girl took all 3 necklaces. Anissa realized she could only clear them by touching them to the grey mist. But the mist didn't want to appear, and she needed to return the jewellery to its owners as quickly as possible. In the afternoon they played and the boys lost, so Anissa asked them to give her their jewellery for a while. But they were hesitant, because their mother said the pendants could not be removed, so the girl took them and Bale took hers. The boys almost cried and called her an evil spirit, but now the girl clearly understood that children are children no matter what Bale appeared in the bedroom, and said it was time for the girl to go to bed. Anissa put jewellery under the plush raccoon's paw, then started faking stretching before bed, because the demon caught her hiding things, but he already knew everything, but pretended not to see it, which is probably how grandmothers behave. The girl looked at him and asked if he was good or bad. The demon smiled and said he was bad. He was a demon after all. Anissa then asked if all demons were bad. She also thought about all the children in the Lagrange family being bad, but the brothers from the Rose Palace looked normal. Anissa sat up in bed and asked the demon if Dietrich would die because of the contract with Bale. The demon asked about payment, because if you think about it, it's mutual, because demons give themselves in service to humans. But the girl didn't understand why this was happening. because demons are stronger than humans. Euclid's, on the other hand, could use the powers of the sun god because he had learned from him, and Lagrangians can borrow the powers of demons by contract and use it for so long until the line between demon and man is erased. The demon scared the girl a little. She realized that Bale would eventually eat her brother. Anissa wondered how she could have stopped it, but it was impossible. For even the sun god Guerra could not prevent him. The little girl realized that this was more difficult than cleansing the aura of a person or object. Bale decided to end the conversation at this point, as it was time for the girl to go to bed. Anissa couldn't sleep. She missed Dietrich, who hadn't shown up at the palace lately, so the girl decided to inspect the necklaces once more. But then she saw a silhouette outside the window. The girl thought it was an assassin, but they hadn't come to her before. They were visiting Dietrich. Silhouette turns out to be Dietrich. She ran to open the balcony doors, but the feeling of fright had not completely gone away, and the boy had been avoiding her lately. The boy was seriously injured, bleeding from his wounds and having difficulty standing. He asked the girl not to scream. The little girl was trembling, though her brother claimed he was fine. The girl naively didn't understand how he could have gotten such wounds. The boy sat down on the sofa and Anissa tried to treat and bandage his wounds. But even now she was almost crying as she watched her brother suffer. Dietrich looked at his sister's crying face and said it wasn't pretty. The bandage didn't help much. The blood came out. The girl got embarrassed and asked where her little brother was looking. Anissa held his hand gently, crying and reproaching her brother for never telling her the truth. At that moment, Dietrich touched her cheek, wiped away her tears, smiled, and asked how a little girl like her had come into their family. Anissa argued that it was okay to cry because even northerners have tears, and she was terribly hurt for her brother. The girl said it hurt her to see her brother now. The boy said he didn't know what the right decision was because he was chasing the right decision and couldn't catch up with it. Suddenly the girl suggested Dietrich run away. Does he really need to become a duke? Yes, Anissa knew that it was her brother's destiny to become duke in a future war. The boy will be the main rival of the protagonist, but once Dietrich becomes duke, he will be eaten by Bale and will be Hermann's enemy. Anissa looked at Dietrich and pleaded with him to get away from this house for the two of us. Anissa put her brother to bed. The little girl realized that life is not a book. Here, every moment has meaning and pain is experienced more strongly. The girl remembered that Dietrich looked sad when he said it was impossible to escape from the Lagrange family. Many in the family wanted Bale for themselves, so he had to be proactive. He didn't believe in happy endings like in children's books. Now Dietrich was asleep, and the girl understood that it was fate to become a duke. There must be another way to achieve it, for now the girl wanted her brother to get better. The girl decided to take the pendant she was hiding under the raccoon. She held the jewelry in her hands and realized that it was the jewelry that was destroying the children's lives. The evil sealed years ago haunts them to this day. A grey mist began to appear around the pendants. Anissa asked the power of God to help her clean these things. She asked from the bottom of her heart. She seemed to have it all worked out. They now sparkled brightly with a bluish light, and then the stones in the jewelry changed colour completely to sky blue. The girl hoped it would help her fight the curse. Anissa looked at her brother and asked God for him to get better. Anissa sat by his side and watched him sleep. She wanted to believe that the cleansed items would help the children of this family morning came. Dietrich woke up. His sister was beautiful in the sunlight, and he wanted to stroke her head. Then Bale appeared in the room and said that Derek and his demon wouldn't bother him for a while after the beating. Bale said that Dietrich had managed to fool Derek and Agares, the two believing that the boy was madly in love with his sister, but they didn't know it was a forced measure. Only the last gate was ahead of the boy. The boy stood up and asked the demon to be quiet. Bale said that it would be inconvenient if the girl woke up now, as he would have to pretend again. Demon noticed that the girl loved this plush raccoon Dietrich had given her a lot. So he said that if he could feel emotion, he would feel sorry for the girl. Bale asked if the boy would tell his sister about his visit to Euclid, who was going to seemingly neutral lands. After making a contract with Bale, all of the boy's emotions faded, and in general, he followed the demon into a world where there are no feelings. Also, the demon feels nothing. It is neutral. So now the boy was thinking about whether he could understand himself better. Dietrich found it difficult to pretend that Anissa was dear to him. At first, it was enough for him to make sure she didn't starve to death, so he didn't understand how he could become attached to her. The boy looked at the girl, realizing that her fate was sealed, for the last gate is open only to those who are willing to give up their treasure. Dietrich didn't understand why he felt this way about the girl. Next, the boy was weaving his way to neutral lands to Joseph. He thought about the girl going with Joseph, but she didn't now he stood on the doorstep of Euclid's house. Grandpa was smiling. He noticed the boy had grown up. Joseph thought the boy didn't like it in this forest, so he decided that he was talked into coming here by Bale. But since it wasn't about the demon, the grandfather realized that the conversation would be about Anissa. He was right. The boy asked him an interesting question. Was it true that Anissa was his sister? The man was surprised that Dietrich had decided to inquire about the girl's origins. But the boy had not previously questioned the origin of his victim for a future trial. Grandpa answered. He said he was sure Anissa was a child of the south and had the powers of Erida, but her eyes are red. This confirmed Dietrich's suspicions. He felt that the girl was not Lagrange. Grandpa noticed that the boy did not even raise an eyebrow, for the boy knew from the beginning that the girl was not his own sister. It didn't matter to Dietrich whether she was his own sister or not, for he is a monster who seeks out suitable victims for his purposes. The boy thought about how if he heard it from someone else, things might change. Dietrich stuck his hand in his pocket, and his grandfather talked about how you didn't have to be bound by blood to be a family. The boy took out of his pocket the candy Anissa had once given him. He treasured it, and not her. Dietrich couldn't decide whether to eat it or throw it away, and it annoyed him. He clenched the candy in his fist. Anissa had become a candy that annoyed him, interfered with him, but he couldn't throw it away. So now pressed the sweetness to her heart. A girl woke up in Castle Dahlia. Anissa sat up on the bed, not understanding where the noise and clamour was coming from. Their garden was full of different children who were making noise. The girl came up to Yurick and asked him what was going on here. The boy confessed that he wanted to come and visit her himself, as always, but all those children followed him. Veronica was there too. She said she wasn't with them, and had been here before Veronica took the role of manager, and asked the other children to tell her why they had come to visit the girl. The Rosecastle trio demanded their jewellery back. Anissa graciously gave them to the boys. They were happy to have the jewellery back, didn't even pay attention to its colour, and then ran off. There was a boy among them, and he came up to Anissa and said that he had heard that a girl could help with a headache that even Joseph couldn't help. Apparently the rumours were the work of Leatrice. She cleaned the boy's aura, and he said he didn't have a headache anymore and thought she was a fairy. But the triplets contradicted him and said she called herself a lone demon. Veronica said if these kids have all of them, the following might fit. The other kids wanted to play hide and seek with her. The little girl didn't expect such a result after the aura cleansing. In the blink of an eye, the Georgina Palace became like a kindergarten. The children who had gotten rid of the curse loved Anissa a lot. Perhaps they felt that she was the one who helped them break the curse. The children came to her every day to play games that the girl made up, but at some point she realized that she was very tired. This had been going on for months, and although the children loved her, she couldn't play anymore and wanted to rest. As the curse thing went away, there were fewer children who needed to have their auras cleansed over time. Now she had a girl come to her for help. Whenever Anissa held someone's hand, their aura would be cleansed. The problem remained with children like Alphonse. Now he had the point of a sword to her throat, as the girl tried to clean another cursed object. Yes, she had managed to clear his bracelet, but the longer someone has interacted with something like that, it's harder to help them. Alphonse confessed to the girl that the only reason he hadn't killed her now was because she was subject to the heir's kill restriction. So Anissa decided not to risk trying to purify Alphonse's aura again. It was already as poisonous as Derek's. Anissa stopped thinking about it and went to play with the kids. The triplets thought the girl was their best friend, the girl. Not to upset them, agreed. But someone grabbed her armpits from behind. Dietrich came into the garden. Anissa began to hug him. And the boy didn't understand what was going on here, who all these children were. The girl wanted to know where her brother had been missing, and he was wondering what had happened to his house. She said she made friends with these kids because she was bored while he was away. He couldn't believe she'd made friends with Catherine Fermer's kids, and the triplets were surprised that this guy knew them. The oldest of the three started to say Dietrich's name but stopped talking. Anissa didn't know what it meant. The boy started to ask the girl to get away from his brother because he was a dangerous man. They asked the girl to run away, since Dietrich had killed their mum's previous children. Dietrich, however, arrogantly asked the little one if he was referring to the children who had participated in the game and had been eliminated. The triplets continued to accuse Dietrich of killing Shobi, who didn't want to participate in the heir survival game. The children said their sister wanted to turn herself in. Anissa couldn't believe Dietrich would kill someone for no reason. Anissa began to realize that Dietrich is not so simple, and far from being the most positive character in this story. One only has to remember how he killed mercenaries many times in front of the girl. She asked her brother if the triplets were telling the truth. Dietrich glanced at her. The boy pulled his hand out after hearing his sister's question and looked into her frightened eyes. He saw no point in discussing the matter now. Anissa saw the black aura engulfing her brother's heart. At that moment, the boy turned around and walked away, and the girl blamed herself for missing the moment when his aura started to change its colour to black. Standing in the castle by the window, the boy looked at the garden and didn't understand why his sister was so surprised. After all, he had never been a good guy. The boy stood and thought, for he, like many of his family, would rather be dust than a demon's slave. He knew that for the Lagranges, who had lost, the best way out was death. His musings were interrupted by Bale, who appeared in the room. The boy turned and walked down the hall. He said it was all easy, but in fact it was more than not easy. Dietrich's heart pricked. He had not expected that for Anissa he would be the one to be feared, for he had been worried about her and had finished all things quickly, just for her sake. The boy never made excuses for his actions, but this one was an exception. Since Shobi died because of her mother, Dietrich was used in the dark to get rid of a girl who wasn't even a candidate then. During the fight, he remembered the words of the girl who said he was using Anissa because he didn't know how to take care of anyone. And it was true, at least at the time, but besides the traitorous pain in his heart, the boy was tormented by the fact that his assumptions about the girl had been confirmed, which meant he should have been more careful. People couldn't know that he really cared for her, because that would mean her life would be in danger, though it was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, Bale warned Dietrich to pay more attention to his sister if he didn't want rumours to spread. Demon pulled out a doll and told the boy to go give it to the girl. Dietrich refused, but Bale pressed the right point, asking the boy if it was guilt he was acting out. The boy ordered the demon to shut his mouth, but it didn't work, and he continued to press his master. The boy never thought he was doing the right thing, but there was no one better suited to be a victim than Anissa. But now he had a feeling that he had chosen the wrong path. Nevertheless, the boy asked the demon when the next test would be. He said he could rest for a month. The boy left for the test, and Anissa told her over a cup of tea that Dietrich did not want to spend time and play with her. The girl's indignation and resentment caused Leatrice to smile, as she thought the girl was already big for such games with her brother. After Anissa destroyed the curse, the lady changed her attitude toward her and began secretly inviting her to her castle for a cup of tea. So, Anissa was happy to go to such receptions with the woman. Besides, the woman treated her well, and she obviously liked the girl, judging by the colour and behaviour of her aura, but the girl was concerned about the question why she didn't like Yurick. The woman noticed how the girl reacted to her cold attitude towards her son, so she asked Anissa for her opinion. The girl thought that her mother's attitude was causing Yurick great pain. The woman agreed with this. The problem was that Leatrice was afraid of her children because her love would be a weakness and ruin for them. Children who grow up in love in this house, and in general, don't live long. So Derek killed her first child, and Leatrice could only watch. But the woman didn't understand why it bothered the girl so much. Leatrice said that this was the first time she had seen a child who cared more about others than herself. Nonsense for this family. It seemed to the woman that when she looked at the girl, she felt as if she had awakened from a dream. Anissa realized that the lady had most likely guessed that she could break curses. Anissa smiled, looking at the woman, saying that it was never too late to change herself and the world around her. Yes, she realized that there were many different demons hanging over the family, but at least she could break the influence of the negative lower ones. But Leatrice didn't believe in it, as children who have a contract with demons become demons themselves. And Dietrich is no exception. The woman continued, She said she didn't know anything about the eligibility requirements, as the Duke had never told her about it. Anissa realized this was true as her aura was clear, but Leatrice was sure that Dietrich's actions were very suspicious. She was sure he wouldn't take care of a useless child like her without a reason. The girl didn't know whether to be hurt more by Dietrich using her or by being called useless. So at night, Anissa took her raccoon and came to Dietrich's room to sleep. The boy decided to refuse her, saying she had her own room to sleep in. Anissa didn't give up, shoved the raccoon at him, and decided to get into bed. The boy didn't understand why he had to pull the toy into bed, but Anissa threw him into a stupor by asking him to take off the obsession. Dietrich didn't do it, lay down on the other side of the bed, and turned away from the girl. The girl had a plan. She wanted to see the black aura on his heart, so she decided to see if her brother was asleep or not, so the girl caught the scent of roses on her, and it was definitely the mark of the curse. Dietrich woke up as he felt Anissa right next to his back. The boy looked at her. The girl was a little embarrassed. Then Bale appeared and dragged the little girl to her room. Dietrich ate behind them and carried the raccoon. The girl didn't understand why she was kicked out. The demon said she shouldn't have sniffed everyone like a little dog. Bale carried her, and the girl pondered the need to find the right moment. After Dietrich stopped coming to the Georgina Palace, Anissa thought that if someone was offended, she should say so directly, instead of ignoring them now. He was sitting at the table with the girl and eating. She thought about the fact that he might have found out that she was using him to survive. One Bale was pleased and happy. Anissa didn't understand what this meal was accomplishing, as brother and sister were not speaking to each other. The girl cleared her throat, and Dietrich thought she was sick and asked her about it. This concern confused her a bit after her complete ignoring, but the girl didn't say anything about it, but asked her brother if he was mad at her or not. He said he wasn't mad. The girl asked him questions and got dry questions, and then the boy said there were too many. This made the girl quite angry. Since the conversation wasn't going well, the girl decided to tell her brother about her day. She started to speak, but Dietrich ignored her and called out to Marilyn. The girl couldn't stand it. She realized that her brother didn't want to talk to her, but she shouldn't show it that way. She said that he should have asked her to shut up, and that would have been enough. The boy sighed heavily, which made the girl angry, and then Anissa saw a beautiful brooch with a red stone on his tie and asked him what it was and where he got it from. She repeated her question under her brother's gaze. Guy didn't understand what this had to do with his sister. Turns out it's the seal of the demon Vasago. The girl repeated the demon's name. It wasn't a curse. She went on to reflect on the demon hierarchy in which Bale was king, and Vasago was an outcast who wanted to take over. Bale and Vasago were both very powerful, but the latter doesn't use humans to communicate with the outside world, so he was considered a creature of legend. Girl leaned over to him and asked him if he'd had a headache lately. The girl didn't believe that Dietrich couldn't sense the negative energy that was building up around that brooch. The boy didn't answer and was about to leave the dining room. She needed to know where he was going now. Anissa felt sad as the boy was leaving again. She didn't know where he was going or why, and now he was carrying that evil brooch with him. Yes, the girl was offended by the boy, but she couldn't leave him in that position, so she ran after him into the garden, asking her brother where he was going. He didn't want to answer, so the girl swallowed her pride and asked her brother not to wear the brooch if possible. Dietrich got no answer as to why he shouldn't wear the thing, turned around and went about his business. The girl ran after him anyway. They came into town. The boy didn't chase her away, even though he didn't say anything. The girl followed her brother, but he never once turned around to look at her. Knowing she was behind his back, he approached the building where a man was waiting for him and bowed courteously to Dietrich. The man forbade the girl to come in with her brother, but she only smiled and hugged her brother's arm. The latter didn't understand why Anissa followed him here. Anissa told her brother that she wanted to stay with him longer. He didn't like it, as this place was quite dangerous, but the girl was sure she would be fine since she came here with her brother. They walked into the building. The man said they were able to increase profits because of the young man's clear instructions. It was a bar. The guy was sitting, studying the report and saying that well-thought-out plans of action never hurt anyone. Dietrich looked appropriate and cool in this setting and at such an activity. The girl couldn't sit on the chair, so Dietrich helped her to do it, and suddenly Anissa saw the customers of the bar harassing Charlotte. they accused her of something and didn't respond to her request to let him go, Anissa suddenly realised that this was the moment when the main characters were going to meet, when Dietrich would save Charlotte from the bad guys. Anissa thought Dietrich was going to go rescue her now, but something went wrong. Namely, the young man was studying documents and not paying attention to anything around him. Anissa asked him if he would help that girl. The guy didn't care about the situation. He didn't move, and the situation between Charlotte and the bar customer escalated. Anissa decided to take matters into her own hands and remotely cleanse the aura of the man who was about to hit Charlotte. Surprisingly, Anissa was beginning to get it, as the man's aura began to change colour to transparent, light and sparkling. The man let the girl go and apologised for his inappropriate behaviour, but all was not well, as the man decided he would sell Charlotte into slavery, as it was much better than taking her to the temple. Turns out there was a bet between them, which the girl won, but the man decided that money was more important than a discreet word, so he refused to take her to the temple. At this point, Charlotte pointed her finger at Anissa and asked the man to take her with him. She offered to sell Anissa to him because he could get more money for her. The man walked toward Anissa, leading Charlotte. As he reached for the girl, Dietrich appeared and ordered the man to take his hands off his sister. The young man was holding a suitcase and warned the man that he wouldn't repeat himself twice, but he didn't understand what was going on and didn't listen to him. The owner of the place came up to the man and said that he had asked him to stop doing such things here. The men stepped aside, Charlotte was saved, and Anissa didn't understand why her brother hadn't helped her in the first place. After that, Anissa approached Charlotte and asked her how she was feeling. Charlotte apologised to the girl, but she was sure that Dietrich would stand up for her. But then, Anissa wondered where the unwavering moral principles of the main character in the novel were. Charlotte assured the girl that she could not return to the temple because her purse had been stolen. Dietrich approached them. He reminded his sister that he had warned her about the danger of this place, and the girl did not understand why the boy did not pay attention to her acquaintance and did not hurry to help her. At this point, the girl realised that the course of events could be disrupted, and the consequences would be dire for Dietrich. So she held out her hands to him in a begging gesture, namely, she asked him for some money. The young man was a little surprised, since it was his sister who had followed him, even though he had warned her, made a fuss in the bar, and was now asking for money. And the girl was worried that Charlotte wouldn't break his seal in the future if they didn't help her now. So the girl went into the boy's suitcase, then asked how much money the girl needed for the trip. She said 30 silver pieces. Anissa took a little more money from her brother and gave it to Charlotte, as she wanted the girl to return to the temple in one piece. Dietrich was watching this all unhappily. At this point, Anissa wanted to leave first and wanted the main characters to socialise, so she called Bale. The demon was surprised that the girl had discovered his presence again, but Anissa wanted to go to the palace, and the demon was going to grant her wish. Dietrich and Charlotte stayed at the bar. The boy looked at the closed doors, sighing as he didn't understand why he cared so much about what Anissa was doing. At this moment, Charlotte came up to Dietrich. She knew that the idea of giving her money was his sister's and not his, but she thanked him from the bottom of her heart. Dietrich realised that there was a southerner in front of him, and the girl had already told him that previously she would not have made such a fuss, but something had happened to her divine powers. Dietrich did not want to meet her, but Charlotte said they would probably meet again, as far as the temple would accept her interpretation of the prophecy, for the girl was sure that she was the one who would have to save the north, and he is the dawn that is imprisoned in winter, from the prophecy. Dietrich interrupted her, calling everything she said utter nonsense told to them in the south by their leader, and he was not one to make up tales about. Then he passed on and said it was definitely not him she should be thanking. As Dietrich walked away, the girl looked at him and thought that her interpretation was probably wrong. A few months passed. Anissa was allowed into the city of Oda, unaccompanied for the first time. The guards sympathised with her, for they did not understand how such a sweet child could be locked up in a castle to observe the traditions of the family. The guards asked the girl to be careful. She could not yet get used to such a friendly attitude of the adults. So after the girl got rid of the cursed things, the servants began to treat her well. Lancel brought her sweets, and the others called her sweetheart and stroked her head. The girl walked through town and thought that it was good that Derek was busy fighting the Euclids, so he didn't care about the family, and didn't know about her dealings with cursed objects, the girl went to the casino again and bought tickets. She hoped that this time she would definitely get lucky. The cashier remarked that the girl had never won a cash prize, and then added that Veronica was upstairs if she wanted to see her. As soon as she heard that, she started up the stairs, as she was dying of boredom, since Veronica and Yurick were busy, and Dietrich hadn't even been home since his meeting with Charlotte. So the girl opened the door of the room upstairs. Veronica was working at her desk, but as soon as she entered the room, the girl started to get nervous. Anissa noticed that her sister was hiding some documents. She wondered what they were. At that moment, Veronica noticed that Yurick was flying here. Veronica asked the girl to go home with the boy, and in return she would send her lots of sweets to the palace. Anissa realized that Veronica had never kicked her out like that. It piqued her interest, so it was clear that the girl was trying to hide something. When Yurick saw the girl, poked his finger at her and asked in consternation what she was doing here, his sister smacked her lips to keep him from saying too much, and the girl noticed his demon had gotten bigger. The boy said he had grown up being with Dietrich. It turned out that the First War of the Roses had now begun, and Dietrich was taking part in it. So Dietrich became the winner of the First War of the Roses. After his defeat, even Euclid, the sun god's favourite, couldn't stand the young man. The young man returned home in triumph, and at that moment a happy Anissa came up to him. Greeting her brother and taking him under her arm, the girl chirped like a bird about how glad she was that he had come home, that she wondered if he would now be the head of the estate. But he was silent. Instead, he wrenched his hand away. The girl stared at him incomprehensibly, not knowing what caused this reaction. The girl thought he didn't recognize her, but that was clearly not the case. His expression was cold and stern. The young man had no idea who she was now the girl was having nightmares, and waking up screaming in the night. It had been 3 years since the war had lasted, and all that time she had been having this dream in which Dietrich would not recognize her. Anissa was already 12 years old. She had learned to read, and it was while she was reading a book that she learned the news that Henry had been killed in battle. Veronica thought the war was just a cover-up, and Alphonse may have already gotten rid of Dietrich. It happened that Yurick, Dietrich and Alphonse were called to war with the Euclids. Because of their strength, more than half of the Lagrange children were killed in battle, while the triplets, she and Veronica, survived. Veronica realized that even if Dietrich survived and returned home, he would be a half-demon. Nothing took only Alphonse, as he was protected by Derek. Plus a certain Gajou wanted to get involved with the heirs, which would mean the end of the Lagrange family. Anissa didn't want to believe any of this. Veronica mentioned her mother, so Anissa asked how Lady Leatrice was doing. The woman took the death of her newborn child hard, because then Neil was no threat to the other heirs. But when Derek lost the first stage of the war, he threw the baby out of the palace, thus killing him. This time Leatrice was very sad and distressed over the murder of her child. Anissa blamed herself for it was she who destroyed the cursed object from the baby's cradle. Destroying items that have been imbued with negative energy triggered the butterfly effect over time. At that moment, Veronica took the girl's hand and said that when the inheritance ceremony was over and the bans were lifted, she wanted to go to the capital, but the girl was in no hurry to agree to run away with the girl. Veronica did not understand why the girl wanted to stay in this house. Anissa said that the Lagrange family had changed a great deal, and if Dietrich came back and became head, he would not have to leave. Veronica warned the girl that the Dietrich she knew no longer existed, and the one who would come would be a completely different man. The young man is most likely completely consumed by the demon. Anissa understood that, but at the same time she believed in her brother. Yes, he didn't answer her letters, but if she stopped believing in him, then who would she believe in? Anissa was picking out her dress. She asked for something comfortable, but they picked out a very pretty and lovely dress. The maids were glowing with joy and delight as they thought they had picked out the perfect outfit for their princess. This dress wasn't really appropriate for a hike and a visit to Joseph's office. The girl was walking in Grandpa's house. She read all the books from the shelves in the bookcase. She was happy that she learned a lot of new information about the world. Anissa was studying all these books to help Dietrich in some way, and then she noticed the sacred tree. It turns out that animals and plants have their own aura, and trees can even move. She reached out to touch the leaves. The girl took a pot of the tree and thought that if she watered it with holy water, it might grow into a cleansing tree. But she hadn't figured out how to use it yet. The girl was about to study her grandfather's notes to decide what to do with the plant when she heard a sound. Anissa ran out of the cabin at the sound. At one point, the girl thought the cabin had a basement because it felt like the sound was coming from under the ground. The girl went downstairs. There was Joseph's secret lab. She was looking through the books in the bookcase. There was a lot of information about Erid, Decavol, and other things. She realized that it would take her a long time to read them all. There were pots of trees a little farther away, and there were a lot of chi, but they had no shade. Anissa realized that they were unusual trees that could suppress the power of shadows, a thought she decided to test out on the little devil he was given by Veronica. And in the desk, the girl found a letter. It was meant for Derek. Anissa thought that Joseph had intercepted the letter, then decided to read it. It said that Camille and Doña Euclid's child was dead based on this letter. She realized that she was presumed dead. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Derek approached a man in armor. The man claimed to have made a pact with his father, the gist of which was that they would be granted victory if they killed the guy. They thought that after something like that, he should have died, but Dietrich told them that apparently they had all been lied to. The young man approached his opponent. He noticed that his father had already lost one stage of the battle. The knight was shaking with fear. Dietrich told the man that since he couldn't kill him, it was his turn to kill his opponent. His gaze was blank. Euclid was sure that he would rather die by his own blade than at the hands of a man who had sold his soul to demons. At that moment, Bale appeared beside him and stopped his hand with the knife. The demon wondered to whom the man had sold his soul. The demon laughed. He saw no honor or dignity in the man. Now Dietrich understood why his favorite relatives had sent him off to fight alone. A friend approached the young man, asking if Dietrich was disappointed in them. Or not. It was Yurick, and with bad news. Derek had sent Alphonse back to Lagrange Manor. Yurick reprimanded his brother. He didn't understand why he hadn't written to Anissa once during the 3 years of the war. But it wasn't that the guy didn't want to do it, and the war was already coming to an end. Dietrich did not even visit his sister when he was at the estate, but he received a letter from his sister, which was full of longing and resentment. Besides, the girl wanted to go to the festival with him when he returned. She asked if he was all right or not, but he didn't write a line in reply, but he was looking forward to coming home. He wanted it badly, more than anything in the world. Dietrich grabbed his brother when he mentioned the girl, but he warned Yurick to mind his own business. Yurick was scared and didn't know if it was all real or not. The picture looked a little ambiguous between the two brothers at this point. Dietrich heard Yurick say that Derek and Alphonse had returned home, while in the manor, Anissa was experimenting on a small demon cub. The wood was hurting him, and he was screaming in pain. The girl asked the worm not to scream because his tail would grow back soon. Anissa assumed that if the tail didn't grow back, then the tree could be used to clear the Lagrange curse completely. The girl had cleared the grounds, so she didn't need the demon contract. The girl was somewhat relieved that Dietrich was no longer wearing that cursed brooch. Anissa continued to walk in the garden, but a maid came up to her and told her that Duke Derek was looking for her. This surprised and stressed the girl a little. The maid looked stern, and the girl had no choice but to follow her. Derek looked intimidating, even gently addressing her. The girl was polite and bowed in curtsy, but the vile odour of his aura was something she could never get used to. The man clarified her name, and then offered her a seat on the couch in his office. He directly said he knew she was destroying the curse shards. The girl didn't understand how he knew that. She assumed he wanted to punish her. Then the man spoke up, saying that her abilities were not like the abilities that appear in people of the North. Anissa pretended not to understand what her father meant. He said he didn't have his blood in her, so she didn't have to wait for her brother to come home. He said he'd let her leave the Lagrange clan. The man wanted Anissa to leave willingly, but she didn't understand the real reason for it. He said that children like her don't live long. He didn't give her time to think and demanded an immediate answer. Derek obviously didn't like her answer. So now she was behind bars in a cage. A night passed by her, and the girl asked him if he could tell a maid named Marilyn about her situation. But the man was stubborn, saying it wasn't his responsibility. He had to make sure she couldn't leave the cage. Well then, the girl reached out and touched the man's aura. Yes, she didn't want to do it that way, but she couldn't do it any other way. then smiled and asked again. She asked if it worked. The girl sighed. For Marilyn, she was calm now. But the triplets must have been worried about her. Sitting in her cell, the girl realized that Dietrich was the only one who held her hand. Even though she deeply disliked it, she remembered it every time she went to bed. Sometimes the girl feared that Veronica was right, and Dietrich had changed. And sometimes she even wanted to run away from the castle, but it was Dietrich who made her feel like a real family, so she waited for him here in the castle. The girl was brought out of her thoughts by a familiar voice. It was her guard who came and brought her raccoon, saying that he had given the information to Marilyn, and that she had asked him to give her the toy. The girl thanked the guard, whose name was Damon. Anissa was bored in her cell and knitting clothes for her raccoon. Since there was nothing else to do, she had been there for quite a while, and suddenly someone called her. There was a horn sticking out of the wall, and someone was repeating her name. The girl was frightened, but the horn said it was him, her brother. Anissa got upset, as she thought Yurick had turned into horns, but it wasn't true. The guy had used communication magic. The young man explained that when he returned, his mother was desperate. The girl was nowhere to be found, and the triplets were crying loudly. The girl didn't want to say that she wasn't Dietrich's sister, so she decided to change the subject and ask where Yurick was now. But the change of subject failed. When the guy didn't answer the question, the girl asked about her brother. Yurick answered in the affirmative, and the girl said that he was probably very busy, so it was okay. After a while, Derek came to her cell. He punched her in the face, leaving a mark and also calling her a victim. Why the Duke was doing this, the girl didn't understand. Then he walked over to her and grabbed her arm, lifting her up. He looked creepy and said it was all Dietrich's fault. The man could think of nothing better to do than drag the frightened girl along. She hoped they would go to Dietrich's, but the man said nothing and just dragged her away from the cell. He dragged her into the castle room and threw her on the floor, Dietrich standing in the audience in full parade. In the castle after their return, Yurick, Dietrich and Bale were talking. Yurick, as well as the demon, did not understand why Dietrich did not want to help Anissa. For one day he would have to ask her for help. The young man told them he didn't have to help her. Yurick was pissed off, as even Veronica's demons tried to protect the girl, and Dietrich decided to pretend that nothing was going on. He also assumed that his brother was just using the girl for his own purposes. But Dietrich looked at his brother with his cold gaze and said that it was none of his business, and he had never learned how to bark at people. Dietrich looked at his sister and realized it was his job not to show his true feelings, and to keep as cold as possible. He asked his father why he did it. Derek pointed out that his precious sister wasn't so precious to him. The man provoked his son. He approached Anissa and said that since she couldn't be the heiress, it didn't matter if he killed her or not. So the boy replied that the father could do whatever he wanted, and Derek interrupted him. The girl didn't expect such a thing from her brother. Dietrich was breaking Anissa's heart more and more with each answer. At that moment the girl realized that Veronica was right. But the election of an heir was about to take place, and Dietrich advised against violence. This did not please Derek, and he struck Anissa, but as she was falling, Dietrich caught her and stopped her from falling to the floor. He thanked his father for taking his advice. Derek turned and walked away, leaving his brother and sister standing by his side. When they were alone, the girl tried to understand the meaning of Dietrich's gaze. The boy put his arm around her, leaned in, and asked if Derek often allowed her to be treated like that. The girl said that although the Duke was often at home, he had no business with her, and she thought that her brother had grown up, but he was still handsome. And then added that she had found a way to change and cleanse the Lagrange house, for there was nothing wrong with children living in peace. But Dietrich said he couldn't, and it felt like the destruction of the bridge between them. He repeated that it was all impossible, and the girl thought he didn't care about her or the other children. The girl started yelling at him for not looking for her, and now he's acting like he doesn't care about her. She thought the guy had decided to take the crooked lane. Yes, they hadn't seen each other in years. But Anissa couldn't believe he could forget everything that had happened between them and what had bonded them. The girl had no idea that he didn't appreciate her, so when he smiled and called her silly, she didn't know how to react. She realized that she was probably wrong to think only of Dietrich, because he was the only family she had. Anissa was starting to cry as she realized she needed to take care of herself, and she was waiting for him in this house. The guy ran his hand over her cheeks. At this point, the young man gently wiped away his sister's tears. The girl realized that any apology he could think of and say, she would not accept and would not be able to forgive him. But she never expected to hear that he never thought of her as his sister and part of the family. Rather, she was a special person to him. Like him, Anissa didn't move. Dietrich didn't move either. Only his hand kept her tears from rolling down her cheeks, and this show of tenderness and affection made the girl's heart speed up maddeningly fast. The charm had passed, and the girl had already met the triplets, who were happy to see her and were crying with happiness. They reported that Damon had come to them and told them that her sister was in the dungeon, and then the girl secretly asked them what they thought about what Veronica had said earlier, namely the breakup of the Lagrange house. Meanwhile, Anissa showed the twins a trunk of her savings. She told me that if anything happened to her, they could use the money however they wanted. In the dungeon, Derek said she would be the victim so he wouldn't touch her. She didn't fully understand his words, but assumed Devo was in the running for the title of heir. Anissa told the triplets half-truths because she didn't want to scare them. The girl realized that Dietrich was hard to change their minds, so she wanted the children to get away from the house, and she wanted to know more about the victim. So the girl came to Leatrice, who was walking in the garden, and asked her if she knew how the successor to the family would be chosen. But the woman did not hurry to answer, and when the girl was almost gone, she said that demons do not just work with people. Each of them needs payment, so whoever wants to get the title will have to pay. Anissa wondered what would happen to whoever didn't pay. The woman huffed. She said her brother would donate to her without a doubt. Leatrice walked over to the girl, hugged her, and squeezed her, that her brother was tough enough to be the heir, but he was definitely not going to be a brother anymore.